The first rain of the season poured down over the Colorado mountains like a cold omen that summer had ended. The wind swept through the tall, slender pines, carrying the musty scent of fallen leaves and cracked cliffs. Ridge Valley Animal Rescue Center, perched on a slope 20 miles of mountain road from the nearest town, had long been the place that held on to the last hope for abandoned creatures. But after the pandemic, even this place was exhausted. The kennels exceeded capacity. Resources were drained. The list of dogs waiting for assistance was so long it had to be extended by hand onto the edge of the already full whiteboard. Then that morning, when the animal control truck pulled up to the back gate, everything fell even quieter than usual. Luis, an animal control officer, stepped down, his eyes distant. In the truck bed sat a small iron crate, tilted precariously, as if one more jolt could burst it open. Inside was a creature that resembled a dog, but no longer looked like one. Echo didn't know where he was, didn't know how long he had been moved, didn't understand who had taken him or why. He knew only one thing. He had to shrink himself down, as small as possible, as hidden as possible. That skin and bone frame curled tightly in the corner of the crate, legs tucked against his belly, neck drooping as if he wanted to disappear. The once sleek black-gray coat was now matted, patches of wrinkled skin exposed, muddied with dirt and claw marks. His neck was swollen, riddled with scars, where an old collar had once cut into the flesh like a ring of torment. "What case is this?" asked Marlene, the shelter director, with no expectation of a gentle answer. Luis shook his head. "Found near the old military base, where Camp Bravo was shut down last year. The property was seized. Neighbors didn't know if anyone still lived there. This one survived alone for at least a few months. Microchip? Yes, but corroded. Couldn't read the number. No name, no history. Reaction? None. No aggression, no resistance. But when approached, he shuts off. Shuts off. Not the fearful kind, not trembling with anxiety, but the kind of fear so deep it forces the body to unplug from all sensation just to avoid collapsing in front of others. When someone tried to remove the collar, Echo didn't growl, didn't bite, didn't flinch. He just lay there like a carcass. Only his half-closed eyes remained, not fully shut, as if guarding something only he could see. The collar was cut off. It required mild sedation. His neck was inflamed, the skin weeping. His entire body was depleted. Nutrition level, 2 out of 9, near the point of no return. But for Echo, the wound wasn't in the neck. It was in the eyes. Echo's eyes didn't look at anyone. No flicker of defiance, not even reflex. Just a gaze so hollow it chilled to the bone, like a void, bottomless, formless, soundless, and within that void he may have lost himself a long time ago. Kennel 14, in the isolated wing at the back of the shelter, was reserved for long-term recovery cases. Echo was placed there. No restraints, no leash. Just an old mattress, a bowl of water, and food in the corner. But he wouldn't eat if anyone was there. Wouldn't drink. Wouldn't even glance. When someone entered, Echo would immediately retreat to the corner. His body stiffened, tail curled tightly to his belly. Eyelids twitched continuously. Breath shallow, trembling. His body held on to only one instinct. To survive, but not to connect. 3 days passed. No change. 4 days. Still the same. Kelsey, the behavior specialist, had worked with many fearful dogs. But with Echo, she couldn't find a single door to knock on. No waiting gaze, no response to reward or punishment, no interest in food, scent, or voice. He doesn't want to exist with humans. Security cameras revealed Echo only left the corner of his kennel between 2 and 4 a.m., when the entire shelter was asleep. He moved in slow, circular steps, hugging the wall, never touching anything. Just walking, as if to reassure himself he was still alive, even if no one knew it. On Marlene's printed file, the behavioral assessment had one red line. Recovery potential, very low, unapproachable, not suitable for community adoption, awaiting final decision by weekend. But just when someone was about to label Echo as a lost case, he shivered faintly. A breeze slipped through the kennel's crack, causing the water bowl to tremble. Echo twitched an ear. His eyes blinked very faintly, as if some part of him still hadn't completely shut down. Some part of him was still listening to the world, even if only through a single breath. At night, when the rescue shelter went dark, when the voices faded along with the light and warmth, the place where Echo remained became unusually silent. A kind of silence not meant for peace, but rather the invisibility of things long forgotten. In the corner of his kennel, Echo did not sleep, did not stir, did not stretch his legs, did not rest his head. He simply lay there. Head pressed to the cold floor, eyes neither fully closed nor open, as if clinging to the last bit of awareness he had left to defend himself, to exist, to wait, or maybe just because he couldn't risk missing whatever might happen. But what could possibly happen to a creature the world had already turned its back on? The infrared camera recorded the motion. Around 2 a.m., when wind swept through the cracks in the roof, when no footsteps echoed along the cold tile hallway, Echo began to move. Not stand, just inch forward, millimeter by millimeter, first his ears, then his neck, then a slow stretch of his front legs. He didn't stretch or yawn like a normal dog. Every movement resembled a broken machine trying to locate a starting point. He walked in a tight circle along the walls of the kennel. 4 paws on the floor made no sound. Tail tucked, eyes downcast, as if even the floor was watching him, and Echo no longer wanted to disturb anything. He paused in front of the water bowl, sniffed for a long time, then took a small lick. But afterward, he stepped back, retreating to the same corner, as though that single action had already exceeded the limits allowed for a wounded being. No one could say exactly what Echo feared. Perhaps the sound of the crate locking when he was first captured. Perhaps the smell of antiseptic on a vet's hands. Or maybe the distant explosions that once shook the ground where he had served. Whatever it was, it didn't exist in the kennel room, but it lived in every cell of Echo's body. Kelsey, reviewing the surveillance footage the next morning, paused at one particular moment. Echo slowly turned his head toward the kennel door. No one was standing there. Just emptiness. But his eyes lingered there for a very long time. "He's listening," Kelsey said to Marlene. "Listening to what?" "Maybe just the echo of himself." On the 7th day after Echo was brought in, Dr. Caitlin Chen offered her assessment. "His physical condition has temporarily stabilized. External wounds are healing faster than expected. But inside..." She trailed off. Her gaze moved to the window that looked into the isolation wing, where Echo lay like a shadow inside a square of light. "Some creatures don't need to die to disappear. Echo has already vanished from this world. What remains is a shell." That afternoon, a small group of local volunteers came for a short visit. They passed by the kennels, handing out treats, calling each dog by name. The other dogs barked happily, jumping up, pawing at the fences. But Echo didn't move. He didn't bother to lift his head, even when a child knelt down and gently asked, "Hey, little buddy, what's your name?" No name, no response, no presence. But if you looked closely, he blinked. Once. and for a creature who had withdrawn entirely from the world, a single blink could be a quiet knock on the door still shut. Marlene added a new line in the internal journal. Echo has not returned, but I have a feeling he hasn't completely left either. The early morning air in the Colorado mountains carried a quality Mira Caldwell always found familiar, even though she had never truly lived there. On the dirt road leading up to Ridge Valley Shelter, a silver mist lay like a delicate shawl draped across the valley. The crunch of tires over gravel echoed faintly through the pine forest. Mira turned off the engine, sitting in the cab for a few minutes more. Her hand rested on a brown, leather-bound notebook, its corners worn and softened with age, but the title on the cover still clear. Notes, Lillian Caldwell. Her mother's name. Lillian Caldwell, a quiet, gentle woman who remained almost invisible in Mira's memory. She passed away when Mira was only 13. But from scattered recollections, evenings when her mother wrote under a soft yellow lamp, the times she stroked Mira's hair so slowly while she slept, Mira had always carried the sense that her mother once belonged to a place far removed from the cramped city apartment they had called home. And this notebook was proof of that. Inside, slanted and composed handwriting spoke softly of the days her mother had volunteered at Ridge Valley Rescue Center in the late 1990s. There was an old dog who hadn't eaten for 3 days. I sat by the kennel, said nothing, just read a few lines from an old book. The next morning he ate. I don't know if I healed them, but sometimes just being beside a creature without asking anything is enough. Mira had read those lines so many times she knew them by heart. That was why she came here. An internship, yes. Graduation requirements, also yes. But the real reason was something else. She wanted to walk the same place where her mother had once placed her hands on forgotten beings. She wanted to sit in that old brick hallway, to listen to the distant barking, the sound of footsteps on wood floors, the wind sweeping through the screen door, and wait for something to echo back. The center's director, Marlene, shook her hand during the short interview. "This shelter's small, understaffed, and sometimes a little isolated," she said. "You've probably heard. Many people transfer out after a week." Mira smiled. "I don't plan on transferring." Marlene looked at her for a few seconds. Maybe, in her eyes, something had clicked. "You are Lillian's daughter, aren't you?" Mira nodded. "She once saved a dog that everyone thought was a lost cause. That dog lived another 3 years. We have a picture of it in the dining room. You'll see it." That afternoon, Mira was given a tour of the entire shelter. She walked slowly, not out of curiosity, but because each step felt like tracing a map without marked paths, a map of memories she never lived, but somehow remembered. Each kennel was an untold story, confused eyes, drooped ears, trembling paws. All of it made Mira feel as if, somewhere in that breath-filled space, a part of her mother still quietly lived. She placed her hand on a white-painted brick wall, its cool, gritty surface making her heart skip a beat. She didn't know exactly where her mother had once sat in this building, which dog she had stroked, or what final words she may have whispered to a creature about to leave. But here, every brick felt soaked in the breath of things left unsaid. Mira didn't believe in the supernatural, but something deeper, more primal, beyond words, made her unable to deny the quiet presence. Like an echo from the past, not ringing from memory, but resonating from this very moment. As she passed the isolation wing, where the wind barely reached, Mira stopped in front of a kennel with no nameplate. No one introduced it, no files, no description, just a wire mesh and a shadow in the far corner. She didn't try to look closely. She didn't need to. There was something that made her spine chill, not with fear, but a sense of being watched in return. watched by something without a name. Kelsey noticed Mira standing too long by Kennel 14. She hesitated, ready to speak, but said nothing. Mira looked like someone listening to a melody in a frequency only she could hear. "That one's a tough case," Kelsey finally whispered. "He doesn't have a name yet." Mira turned. "No name?" "No one's been able to stay close to him long enough to give one." Mira bent slightly. She didn't press her face to the mesh, didn't lean forward, just tilted her head gently. A faint sound, like claws tapping cement, came from the corner. A shadow moved. Not clearly. Just a blur. But to Mira, it was like a word whispered without full voice inside her mind. "Did she know?" Mira asked suddenly. Kelsey blinked. "Who?" "My mother. Did she know there are things that, even if you can't name them, still exist and never fade?" Kelsey didn't answer. She didn't fully understand the question, but sensed it would be wrong to interrupt whatever had just touched Mira. After her first afternoon, Mira returned to her small rented room halfway up the mountain. The night wind here hissed gently through the window bars. A sound not everyone could tolerate, but to Mira, it was like the forest's lullaby, telling her stories of creatures that quietly endured. She reopened her mother's journal. Flipping through slowly, she noticed for the first time the passages she hadn't read carefully before. Not stories, but quiet monologues without an audience. "Sometimes the dog doesn't need us to save it. It just needs to know we're still there." Mira lightly touched that line, just as she had touched the air inside Kennel 14. Not to save, not to call, just to be there. The next morning, returning to the shelter, Mira didn't say much. She simply pointed to Kennel 14 and asked, "May I sit here?" "He won't respond," Kelsey warned. "I know." Mira pulled over a small folding chair. She didn't sit facing the kennel. Didn't stare. Just placed the chair 3 meters away, slightly angled, and sat down. She held her mother's journal. Her gaze fixed on the distant yard. Echo, in the corner, didn't move. But there was a blink. Software wind drifted down the long hallway, brushing past Mira's hair, letting a few strands slide across her cheek. She didn't tuck them back, because in that moment, she feared she might interrupt something fragile that was trying to survive. After 20 minutes, Mira stood up. She didn't say goodbye, didn't wave, just took a single step back, bowing her head slightly. Echo didn't move from the corner, but after Mira disappeared from the doorway, the camera recorded this. Echo turned his head, not toward the direction she had gone, but to where she had once sat. And in that damp, cold concrete room, no one heard it clearly. But if one listened deep enough, maybe they would hear a faint echo, very faint, but enough to name something that had never truly been lost. That sentence kept repeating in Mira's mind like a silent breath as she returned to Ridge Valley Shelter the next morning. No one had called her, no assigned shift, no scheduled meeting with Kelsey or Doctor Caitlin. It was just one step, then another. And then she stood at the far end of the corridor, where Kennel 14 lay quiet like a forgotten crack in the wall of the world. Mira brought only one thing with her, her mother's journal. This time not to read, just to hold in her hand like an open gateway. The corridor was quieter than usual. The scent of antiseptic still lingered, but had faded. Sunlight slanted gently through the screen door, casting faint stripes of light across the gray cement floor. Mira stopped in front of Kennel 14. She didn't call out, didn't step closer, didn't speak or try to coax. She simply sat in the same spot as before, 3 meters away, slightly to the side, her gaze turned away, but her heart was entirely focused inward. Inside the kennel, Echo still lay curled in the shadowed corner, where the light could not reach. But today, Mira no longer felt him as invisible. On the contrary, she sensed his presence, not with her eyes, but with that vague instinct we feel when someone is watching us from behind, even when we don't turn around. She didn't know if Echo remembered her, but she remembered the feeling from the day before, the sense that something had echoed back from the deepest part of him. And she was here to quietly answer. No communication, no progress. To an outside observer, it would seem pointless, a young woman sitting silently in front of a closed kennel, while the creature inside paid her no attention. But Mira didn't need anyone to validate it, because she wasn't sitting there to heal. She was sitting to be allowed to exist. For Echo, that was everything. A soft sound behind her made Mira startle. Kelsey had arrived, holding a folder. "He still hasn't moved?" she asked, her voice nearly a whisper. "No," Mira replied quietly. "But today, something's different." "Different how?" "The silence today isn't like yesterday." Kelsey looked inside. Echo was still lying down, his head between his paws, eyes half open. But something in his posture had shifted, softened, less guarded, as if he no longer curled into himself to shield against the pain, but simply let himself lie on the cold floor. It wasn't a sign of progress, not by any behavior manual. But it was a whisper, an echo, very faint, sent back from the place where he'd once been muted. Kelsey walked away. Mira remained. She thought of her mother. Perhaps she too had once sat like this, beside a creature that didn't look at her, didn't thank her, didn't come closer, just allowed her to be present. Mira took off her light jacket, folded it, and placed it beside her. The breeze slipped in more gently than yesterday. It no longer carried antiseptic, but the scent of pine and sun. Echo stirred. Just once. But Mira noticed. She didn't lift her head, didn't react. She didn't want to turn that breath into a target. She just wanted to let it be what it was. She quietly opened the journal, not to read, just to look at her mother's handwriting, and imagined the same hands that once wrote those words now resting on Echo's back. So softly. Mira didn't cry, but something in her chest began to loosen, like a thin layer of ice cracking under the first warmth of spring. Maybe it was a feeling that had waited a very long time, not waiting to be answered, but to simply be present when someone needed a silent witness to their pain. Mira had studied animal behavior, anxiety disorders in dogs, and PTSD in socially structured species. She knew the theory by heart. But here, in this hallway, before a creature that had shut down from the world, Mira understood that no textbook could teach her how to sit without expectation. Only memory could. And a little bit of faith, like the way Echo was breathing. Slow, but steady. A small leaf fluttered through the doorway, spinning on the faint breeze. It slipped through the kennel bars, landing on the floor in front of Echo. Mira saw his ear twitch. He didn't lift his head. Just a flicker, enough to say, "I'm still here." She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, her mother's image appeared, sitting beside some kennel 20 years ago, also waiting for a tiny motion, also remembering a rare blink. Not every creature needs to be saved. Some just need someone to witness that they survived. Lillian Caldwell. Mira opened her eyes. In front of her, Echo hadn't moved, but the last light of day had slid across part of his body, and glinted on a patch of worn silver fur where a long scar curved like a handwritten word. She didn't know where that scar came from, didn't know which mission or which person, but looking at it, Mira felt Echo wasn't wounded. He was the wound, still breathing. Time moved slowly. She didn't check the clock. She didn't need to. She just listened to each micro-movement, the soft scrape of a claw, Echo's shallow inhale, and her own heartbeat. Steady, not imposing, just present. As the light faded in the hallway, Mira knew it was time to stand. She slowly closed the notebook, folded her jacket. But before she left, she took one step closer to the kennel. Still not near. Just close enough for the light in her eyes to meet his. One more time. Eyes that weren't beautiful or clear or bright, but held something like the look of someone who had once been left behind and was now wondering if they were allowed to hope for one more chance. "Tomorrow," Mira said softly. Not a promise, not a certainty. It was just an echo sent outward, not in hope of a response, only in hope that the silence would be enough for some creature to hear it and know it was no longer alone. The next morning, Mira returned to the shelter without being asked. She brought with her an old book, not a textbook, not annotated, just a collection of short stories her mother once loved, its cover wrinkled, its spine curved with time. In her mind, she still heard the last moment from yesterday. That cloudy gaze, blinking once, like a quiet knock on a door long closed. The hallway of the isolation wing was still as silent as ever. The morning air carried a cold dampness, the smell of dry cement, disinfectant, and something invisible. The silence of dozens of stories never told. As Mira approached Kennel 14, she didn't look in right away. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew she was being watched. Echo still hid, still curled into himself like a shadow dissolving into the stone wall. But his eyes, for the first time, were fully open, tracking Mira's every movement, not in a defensive way, not with fear, just a gaze, placed exactly where it needed to be, at the right time, not drifting elsewhere. Mira felt that gaze brush across her as she knelt to set her bag down. She didn't lift her head, didn't return the eye contact, but she tilted her face slightly to the side, very subtly, as if to let him see more clearly. In behavioral psychology, this is called intentional eye contact. When a creature moves beyond simply existing and begins choosing where to place its focus, when it no longer turns its face away, it means it has acknowledged the other's existence. Mira opened the book. She didn't sit up too straight, didn't read too clearly. Just soft lines. The girl reached the last village in the valley, where people said those who had lost their names could still hear a calling from the forest. Her voice was just enough to carry a few meters. Not loud, not aimed at Echo. Just a presence made of words, demanding nothing. In the shadows, Echo's eyes still followed her. He didn't come forward, didn't breathe heavier. Just kept that gaze like a thread stretched taut. Mira knew. Not everyone would notice it, but she didn't need grand signs. A lingering look from a creature frozen in trauma was already the first breath of revival. When she pretended to bend down to pick something up from her bag, Echo's eyes tracked her. Still no body movement. But there was a pause in his gaze, as if Echo was waiting to see if she would stay. She noticed. And she stayed. Time passed. An employee walked through the hallway. Echo recoiled, but the moment that person disappeared, his eyes found their way back, to where Mira sat. She didn't smile, didn't say anything else. Just nodded once, just enough to affirm, "I see you." When Mira stood after nearly an hour, the air had shifted slightly, the wind slipping through the kennel bars, lifting a few strands of hair across her forehead. Echo remained in his corner. But this time, as she walked away, his gaze didn't let go immediately. His eyes followed her steps, all the way until her figure vanished from the corridor. It was a very small step. No one else saw it. No cameras recorded it. No one wrote it into the file. But Mira knew. Echo had begun to look. And when a creature starts watching something beyond itself, it has begun rewriting the definition of the world. Autumn winds came earlier than usual. In the mountains of Colorado, the cold waited for no one. It slipped silently into every crack, every fingertip, every breath, and into everything that hadn't yet found a name. Ridge Valley Rescue Shelter was wrapped in the silvery gray of morning mist, as if the whole mountain was holding its breath for something important about to happen. And inside Kennel 14, that something had begun. Not with barking, not with motion, but with movements so subtle you had to be completely still to notice them. Kelsey was the first to see it. One morning, while reviewing the overnight security footage, the slowed recording showed this. At 2:17 a.m., Echo had moved from the corner, where he used to lie as still as a shadow, and walked toward the water bowl. No leaping, no rushing, just 3 steps, small, measured, along the edge of the kennel. He drank, then returned to his corner. But this time he didn't lie down right away. He sat in the posture of a guard dog, ears alert, eyes open, head upright, only for 3 minutes. Then he lowered himself to sleep. "He's no longer just existing," Kelsey whispered to Marlene as she replayed the footage. He adjusted his state, not out of instinct, but by choice. Marlene said nothing. She just watched the shifting gray form on the screen, then turned toward the window looking out to the isolation wing, where Mira Caldwell had sat nearly every day for almost 2 weeks. Mira didn't know about the camera. She didn't know Echo had stood up. But that morning, when she took her usual seat, she sensed that something had changed. Not in the light, not in the sound, but in the very quality of stillness in the space. Echo's breathing was slower now, no longer trembling like before. And though he still curled up, his ears tilted slightly toward Mira each time she spoke. Mira kept the rhythm, like a musician who knows this symphony needs no crescendo, only steadiness. She sat in the same spot, the same angle, back straight, hands resting lightly on her knees, her gaze never directly at him, but every movement carefully measured to avoid tension. The small speaker continued to play instrumental music. Today it was slow piano, paced like a resting heartbeat. The volume was low enough to blend into the sound of wind slipping beneath the door. She didn't read. She only whispered. A few repeated sentences, like lullabies without melody. "It's getting chilly now. Dr. Caitlin's niece got a pair of puppy-shaped mittens today. She says the little one won't take them off, even during lunch." This was a technique Mira had used with severe PTSD patients, especially with the young soldier she helped last year. No conversation, no pressure to open up. Just presence, with a stable rhythm, non-threatening, without judgment. Echo didn't respond clearly, but Mira noticed subtle signs in the smallest details. A flick of the ear when she paused, a change in breath when the piano entered its repeating motif. It wasn't recovery. It was the reflex of a creature slowly relearning how to exist in a world with others in it. And Mira remained there patiently, like a fixed point in a shifting space, because she knew consistency was the first thing to rebuild, even before trust. That afternoon arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening between two beings separated by a wall of iron bars. Mira sat in the same spot. Her shadow stretched long in the fading sun, reaching closer to Echo's kennel than usual. A light breeze passed through the hallway, flipping a corner of the notebook in her hand. But she didn't read. She just sat, like always, eyes closed for a long time, allowing herself to do nothing but be there. Inside the kennel, Echo curled up as usual, front legs tucked in, eyes half closed, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. He had heard Mira from the moment she entered the hallway. That distinct sound she made dragging the chair, not loud, just a soft glide on the floor, the bag being placed down. A light cough, unintentional, then silence. Echo knew all of those sounds. At first they made him wary. Each tiny movement once signaled a threat, a leash, a grip, a syringe, a collar biting into skin. Echo's old world was one of commands and survival reflexes. But now, those sounds no longer made him flinch. They had become familiar. And for the first time, Echo didn't hide from the afternoon light, and didn't hide from Mira's eyes. He lifted his head slowly, very slowly, as if afraid to dislodge something delicate in the air. His ears perked gently. The light filtered through his gray-silver coat, highlighting the old scar on his right shoulder. Echo looked straight ahead. He didn't shift his gaze, didn't glance to the opposite side. His eyes met Mira's, and didn't retreat. For the first time, Echo allowed someone to see him, not just the body, but the part of the soul still sitting within that silence. And that part, though once shattered beyond repair, was still there, fragile, trembling, but looking back. Mira didn't respond immediately. She had read enough, seen enough to know that when a creature who's shut down decides to make eye contact again, the most important thing to do is nothing. No smile, no whisper, no praise. Just stay there, meeting that gaze, with eyes that demand nothing. The moment didn't last long. Echo held it for 3 full breaths. Then he blinked, turned his head away, slowly, without panic. But Mira knew. A door had just made a soft click in the dark. Not because it had opened, but because someone inside had just tried the handle for the first time. The afternoon turned gray. The shadow of the pine tree outside the mesh door stretched across the floor, almost touching the legs of Mira's chair. Echo lay down again. But this time he didn't turn his back to Mira as he usually did. He lay on his side in a half-alert posture, one ear up, one eye still open. He didn't want to lose sight of the one sharing space with him. Mira closed the notebook. Her hands rested in her lap. Still no words. But in her chest, a new rhythm pulsed. The rhythm of someone who had finally been seen again, after so many days of being invisible. That day, when Mira left, Echo didn't move, didn't approach, didn't whimper. But when she disappeared beyond the hallway corner, the security camera recorded. Echo stood up. He didn't walk anywhere, just stepped to the edge of the kennel, the very spot where her gaze had just rested. He stood there for nearly 5 minutes. No barking, no growling, no calling. Just a silent figure in the dusk, standing where Mira's presence had been. Mira wasn't surprised when her phone vibrated on a Monday morning. In clinical animal therapy, cases often shifted suddenly, and more than once, she'd been called to assist with special individuals. But this time, the call wasn't from the shelter, nor from a veterinarian. It came from a coordinator with the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Western Colorado region. "We have a patient from the Veterans Support Program, former Special Forces, currently living in isolation, refusing inpatient care." He's been diagnosed with complex PTSD, with mild neurological damage. The doctor prescribed motor therapy and peripheral sensory stimulation. Mira paused for a few seconds. He agreed to treatment? But he didn't refuse either, and that's more than anyone's gotten from him in the last 6 months. The patient's name was Noah Whitaker, age 37. Status: living alone in a wooden cabin at the northern edge of Glenridge Forest, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town. Background: served in the Middle East, discharged after an IED-related injury. Psych profile: no social contact, hyperreactive to loud noises, signs of chronic insomnia and severe emotional self-isolation. Mira accepted without hesitation, not because the case was easy, but because something in the coordinator's voice sounded just like the way people had spoken of Echo in those early days. Unresponsive? Nothing special? But hasn't shut down completely. On her first morning at the cabin, wind rushed sharply down the mountain ridge. The road leading to the house wasn't paved, just an old trail covered in pine needles. No doorbell, no house number. Just a modest wooden home, 3 creaky steps, and a dust-covered pickup truck parked to the side. She parked a few meters away, pulled her therapy bag from the trunk, and walked to the door. Knocked 3 times, short, gentle. No reply. She raised her hand again, but the door opened from the inside without a sound. The man before her didn't look like a patient. Noah was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark t-shirt and worn khakis, still clean. His face looked gaunt, not from illness, but from lack of sleep and human presence. His eyes weren't red, weren't glazed, weren't wild. They were just silent, like the surface of water stilled long after the wind had passed. Mira gave a faint smile. "Good morning. I'm Mira Caldwell. I've been sent by the VA to assist with your therapy." Noah nodded, didn't invite her in, didn't step aside. After a brief moment of stillness, he turned and walked inside, leaving the door open behind him. The cabin was plain but orderly. Wooden floor, small dining table, mismatched chairs. No family photos. No books, no electronics. Just an old clock and a picture frame turned face down. Mira didn't ask. She placed her bag on the floor and pulled out a few light tools. A softball, resistance bands, a mat towel. "This first session is just for baseline assessment," she said gently, evenly. "No workouts, no contact, just guidance and observation." Noah nodded again. That gesture, Mira noticed, felt more like a military reflex than true agreement. She began by describing each tool, not like teaching, but like storytelling. "This is a rubber ball. It looks like a dog toy, but it's used for wrist tension and tactile reflexes." When she said the word dog, Noah's eyes flickered, just briefly, but Mira caught it. For 30 minutes, she watched, from his eye movements to how he placed his feet. Everything was overly cautious, as if Noah wasn't living, just managing behavior. When the assessment ended, she packed up slowly. Before leaving, she said, "Next time I'll bring a small speaker, play some background sound. It can help stabilize sleep." Noah didn't object. That was the first signal. At the door, Mira glanced to one corner near the steps. There was a stainless steel bowl, upside down, covered in dust, but with visible scratch marks along the rim. As if a dog had once lived there, had eaten there, had been. In her car, Mira didn't start the engine right away. She looked back at the wooden door, now closed, and thought, "That man doesn't need someone to touch him. He needs someone who knows when to step back and when to stay." Mira always believed there are moments that can't be explained with words, only felt. And that morning, when she stepped through the door of Noah Whitaker's cabin for the second time, A chill passed down her spine, one that didn't come from the weather. The cabin was unchanged, the table still bare, the photo frame still face down. Noah stood by the window, looking into the woods. The slanting light hit his shoulder, dividing half his face into shadow. He didn't turn when Mira entered, just nodded slightly. "Good morning," Mira said, her tone even. He didn't reply, but a slight shift in his shoulders told her he'd heard. She laid out the same tools as before. No questions, no pressure. The session was shorter, just 15 minutes. She guided a few neck and shoulder relaxation techniques. Noah followed. No extra movements, none missed. He was like a soldier who still upheld discipline but had detached emotion from every gesture. As Mira packed up, Noah suddenly spoke, so softly she nearly thought she imagined it. "Have we met before?" She looked up. "No. I don't think so." "Your voice," he said, eyes still fixed on the window. "It's familiar." She gave a soft smile. "Maybe. It's just because I'm not trying to sound unfamiliar." Noah tilted his head slightly, acknowledging it, then fell silent again. On the way home, Mira didn't think much of the question. But the strange feeling lingered, like Noah was holding on to a piece of memory he couldn't quite shape. After Mira left the shelter, Echo didn't move again. He sat there a long time, eyes open, but not fully awake. Kelsey watched from the camera. Echo seemed suspended between two worlds, one half still the ghost in the kennel's corner, the other trying to remember something that had been pulled away for too long. Something, once so familiar it had become reflex, a name, a person, a sound, a scent, finding its way back, cell by cell. That night, Echo didn't lie in the corner of the kennel. He lay in the center, right where Mira usually sat, just outside the bars, ears perked, breathing heavy in short bursts, like someone who had just outrun a nightmare and wasn't sure if they'd escaped it yet. When the hallway fan settled into its steady rhythm, he let out a soft whimper. No one heard it. But he did. He heard himself. The next morning, Mira arrived earlier than usual. She wore the same jacket as the day before. She didn't know why. Only that something in Echo's behavior yesterday made it impossible to do otherwise. As she stepped into the isolation wing, Echo was already standing. Not startled. Not fleeing. Just standing. Waiting. Mira stopped at the gate. She didn't sit right away. She slowly crouched, opened her bag, and pulled out a soft cloth. Then paused. Echo took a long breath. He didn't step forward like he had the day before, but his gaze didn't leave her sleeve. Kelsey approached, intending to call Mira into the clinic. But when she saw Echo watching with an intensity that seemed to recognize something beyond scent, she stopped, arms folded. "There's something in that smell," she whispered, "and it's not about Mira." That afternoon, back at her lodging, Mira rummaged through her bag. She washed the jacket, but kept a seat cloth she'd brought the day before, one she had used during a therapy session with Noah. When she held the cloth near her face, she caught the scent of wood, plastic, the fabric of the cabin, and something else, human, indistinct but unmistakable. She couldn't name it, but Echo had recognized it before she did. That night, Mira reopened her mother's journal. She wasn't looking for any particular passage, just turned the pages slowly, as if listening to old breaths. And near the edge of one page, she found this line. "Sometimes the wounded creature doesn't remember the voice, doesn't remember the face, but it remembers the scent of the one who survived alongside it." The next morning, Mira brought the cloth back to the shelter. She didn't hide it. She placed it in a clear plastic bag, slightly open. then sat in her usual chair and gently slid the bag towards the edge of the kennel. Echo came, not fast, not eager. He stepped forward as if walking through his own memory, each step carrying a scent he couldn't name, only knowing it once meant everything he understood about safety. He pressed his nose to the edge of the bag. Stayed there. A long time. Mira didn't blink, didn't move, didn't call out. She just breathed, steady, soft, as if trying to hold the rhythm of Echo's heart so it wouldn't break. And then, Echo let out a soft whimper. It sounded like a gasp, but caught in his throat. His eyes stopped on Mira. That look didn't ask. It ached with a quiet question. Is that person still alive? Mira turned her face away. She couldn't bear the weight of such directness. She no longer knew whom she was facing. Echo, or a fragment of memory resurrected from everything that had never been said. When she left that day, Echo followed, to the very edge of the bars. As Mira turned and walked down the hallway, he sat. He didn't return to the corner. He just sat, eyes tracking her, like someone who couldn't leave the place where they'd once lost something important. That night, for the first time in many months, Echo slept without resting his head against the wall. He lay his head on the cloth Mira had left behind. The scent of a stranger. But it was an old Echo, just enough to open a door no one remembered was still there. Mira hadn't planned to ask. At least, not that day. But during the 6th therapy session, when Noah executed a slow arm raise with more precision than ever, as angled sunlight slanted through the wooden frame and scattered across the floor, and soft piano music played gently like a second breath from the speaker. She sensed something beginning to break free from the long silence. No pressure, just a stream of water beginning to seep from a cracked stone. "Have you ever had a dog?" Mira asked, as casually as one might ask about the weather. The question hung in the air for a few seconds, as if it might vanish into nothing. Noah placed the rubber ball down and sat upright. He didn't look at her. "Why do you ask?" Mira didn't look away. "It's just, I noticed you react slightly whenever I mention barking. It's happened more than once." Noah was silent for a while. "Not owned," he said softly. "Worked with." Mira nodded. She waited. Noah leaned back against the wall. His shoulders tensed slightly. Not defensive, more like his body was remembering how to stand in a military corridor, upright, no weakness shown. "Afghanistan," he began. "Last 2 years, I was on a search and recon team. We had a working dog. His name was Shadow." Mira tilted her head slightly. "Shadow," she repeated, the syllable slipping softly from her throat. Noah closed his eyes. German Shepherd. Black coat, gray chest, eyes slightly mismatched, right eye more amber than the left. He had a long scar down his right shoulder. Got hit by debris during our first prisoner rescue. No one retrained him after that, but Shadow still responded to my voice, like he didn't need commands, just my voice. Mira sat very still. She didn't take notes. Her hands rested gently on her lap. She just listened. Noah continued without looking at her. "He wasn't a pet, not friendly. But Shadow, he was a soldier. He never walked ahead of me. Always stayed on the left, about half a step behind. He could read the wind. Warned me even before the detector picked anything up." He gave a faint, joyless laugh. "A few times we made it out alive thanks to Shadow. He never barked. He just looked. And if his right ear moved, it meant I had to stop immediately." Mira felt something tighten in her chest. "The scar on his right shoulder, was it long or deep?" she asked calmly. Noah turned his head towards the window, eyes narrowing. Not deep, but long, darker than the coat. You could spot it from an angle. The room fell into silence for a moment. Then Mira asked gently, "Did you ever try calling him after it happened?" Noah didn't answer right away. "No one let me," he said at last. "After the blast, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was already at the medical base. They said Shadow ran off after the explosion. No one was sure if he'd survived. I was shipped back to the States shortly after. No one ever told me anything more." The air in the room thickened. Not heavy, but like someone had opened the lid of a box they weren't ready to look inside. Mira nodded slowly. Then she spoke, a near whisper. "Do you remember which command Shadow responded to most?" Noah pressed his lips together, his hands clenched on his knees, then released. "Attention." One word, sharp, clear, commanding. He always lifted his head when I said that, like it was the key that powered his entire system. In Mira's mind, images began rewinding. The way Echo had suddenly stood. The way his right ear always perked up every time she came near. That gaze, locked on every movement, the scar, the silent alertness. Uninterested in rewards, but aware of every shift in the air. She inhaled, steadying herself. "Do you have a photo of Shadow?" she asked. Noah closed his eyes. "Maybe. I'm not sure." He stood and walked into the back room. Mira heard the sound of a drawer, rustling paper, a metallic click, like an old lock being undone. When he returned, he was holding a worn leather wallet, carefully tucked inside his jacket. He pulled out a photo. Didn't hand it over immediately. "It's blurry," he said. "Hard to see clearly. Taken outside. Backlit." Then he passed it to Mira. It was a small photo. Faded. A man in uniform, clearly Noah younger, his eyes not yet carrying so much weariness. And beside him, a black German shepherd, standing slightly sideways, eyes looking up, right ear slightly higher than the left. Right shoulder, a dark line running diagonally from the neck down toward the back. Mira said nothing. She just stared at it for a long while, then folded it carefully and handed it back to him. And in her heart, there was no more doubt. Noah turned the photo over again, slid it back into the wallet like closing a door that had swung open too fast. But his hand still held the soft edge of the leather, as if not ready to let go. Mira looked at him. She didn't ask further. Didn't push. The silence between them was no longer the awkwardness of strangers. It had become a necessary space, a pause before something deeply unspoken might finally take shape. A moment later, Mira slowly pulled her phone from her coat pocket. She opened her photo library, scrolling through familiar frames. Each photo had been taken without much thought, just part of her habit of observing, documenting the therapy process. But now, each image might carry a weight she hadn't realized until this moment. She didn't hand the phone over right away. She just set it gently on the table between them. "There's a dog at the shelter. I've been working with him. I don't know if you recognize anything." Noah didn't touch the phone. He looked at her for a few seconds, his gaze pausing at the corner of her mouth, as if reading a line of text only visible to someone who had once lost something too large to name. Then he leaned down and tapped the screen with a calloused finger. The first image showed a side angle. Echo standing, body tilted toward the kennel door, eyes facing the hallway. Not detailed, but enough to see the right ear stood higher. The stance leaned left, a patrol dog's habit. Noah didn't react right away. Mira slowly slid to the next image. Echo was lying down, head resting on his front paws. Part of his shoulder revealed a long, dark scar, running from the neck down toward the scapula. Noah blinked. Once. then looked longer. Mira touched the screen and moved to the third photo. This time Echo was looking up, his gaze straight into the lens. No fear, no avoidance, but no plea either. It was a look that was completely alert, completely knowing. Noah sat upright. His entire body seemed to be pulled out of its defensive posture. His chest rose and fell slightly. His gaze lingered longer on Echo's face. The way Echo looked into the camera, it was exactly how Shadow used to look at him in the desert, when no one else had noticed anything, but the dog already knew something was coming. "No way," Noah murmured, almost inaudible, "but maybe." He leaned back into his chair, eyes on the ceiling. His hand left the phone, but his thumb still trembled slightly, as if it was still touching something that had just slipped away. Mira stayed silent. She knew not to intrude on this moment. The moment when a man was wrestling between logic and what the heart and body had already recognized first. Noah turned back. "Does he have a name?" "We call him Echo," Mira replied softly. Noah froze. "Echo?" "Because he didn't respond to anything, but he was still there, still echoing, like a voice bouncing back from somewhere far away. I don't know why I chose the name at first. It just felt right." Noah bowed his head. His voice caught. "Shadow used to have a habit. If I was silent for too long, he'd come close, not touching, just standing there, like asking, 'Are you still here?' Like an echo. An echo." Neither of them spoke for several minutes, only the ceiling fan's gentle hum, brushing across the wooden floor. Mira placed her hand on the table, not reaching for Noah's, just placing it down. A still point, and Noah looked at that hand, didn't touch it, but for the first time, let his eyes rest there. "Do you want to meet him?" Mira asked. The question came out softly, but carried her entire heartbeat with it. Noah didn't respond right away, but his gaze remained on the dark screen, where Echo still lay in the image. Eventually, he gave a slight nod. Not certainty, not commitment. Just a small movement from someone who hadn't believed he had the right to hope anymore. Isolation Room 2 sat at the end of the west corridor of Ridge Valley Shelter, a rarely used area, now scrubbed, disinfected, and meticulously prepared all morning. Everyone understood. This wasn't a social interaction case. It was a survival trial, not for Echo, but for a piece of memory that had once been the entire world for both man and dog. And if it failed, there might not be another chance. Mira arrived first. She checked everything again: soft lighting, double lock doors, the overhead camera in place. On one side was Echo, transferred from Kennel 14 that morning through a gentle behavior disruption method. No force, only familiar scents and background sound. Echo had been in the room since early morning. By afternoon, he was standing, not pacing, not retreating into corners, just standing, waiting. No one had taught Echo the concept of time, but somehow he seemed to know. Today was not like other days. Noah arrived with Kelsey at 3:14 p.m. A light rain had just passed. The scent of damp earth clung to his shoulders. Sunlight slipped through breaks in the clouds and painted a long streak across the tiled floor, like a thin line dividing past and present. He walked slowly, not from pain, but because he felt he was approaching something he had once thought lost, and feared that if he moved too quickly, it might vanish like smoke. Mira walked beside him, saying little. At the isolation room door, Noah stood still for a long moment. "I'll go in alone," he said. His voice was low. Firm, not persuasive or assertive, just a fact spoken aloud. Kelsey nodded. "There's an emergency call button just beside the door," she reminded. "If anything feels wrong—" "It won't," he interrupted softly. But it was enough to let them know. He didn't need reminders about the boundaries of his own limits. He had lived inside them for too long already. The door opened. The isolation room was so quiet they could hear Noah's skin brush against the metal handle. As he stepped in, the overhead light fell onto Echo, sitting still against the far wall. No lowered head, no growl, no retreat, just silence meeting a figure that had once lived inside him and had never truly disappeared. Noah stopped 5 meters away. His eyes landed on Echo. There was no instant recognition, no cinematic flood of emotion, just stillness, a weight, a desperate holding on to what was still whole after 3 years of absence. "Shadow," he called. One word, very soft. Echo didn't move. Noah closed his eyes, took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he shifted fully into his military tone. Each word crisp, rounded, hard, exactly how he used to speak, on white sand under blazing sun before every operation. Attention, a single command, not drawn out, not forced, just a key turning the exact rusted lock after all these years. Echo blinked. Once. Then lifted his head. It wasn't reflex, not reaction to a call. It was because his body knew. That sound had once meant life. Noah didn't blink, didn't step forward. He stood still, like the period at the end of a sentence that had waited 3 years to be written. Echo stood up. No burst, no tension. Just stood, like someone waking from a dream where everyone had left, and finally hearing the first voice calling them back. His eyes landed on Noah. Right ear raised, body tilted. Left foot stepped forward but didn't go further, as if waiting for a second command. Noah bit his lip. His shoulders trembled, not out of fear, but because he was holding back a flood of emotion with every ounce of training that had taught him never to cry in front of anyone. "Sit." The voice wasn't loud, wasn't commanding. It was simply the echo of a memory once tied to safety, discipline, trust. Echo sat, no hesitation, no confusion, just a smooth, practiced movement, as if it had never been forgotten. The room fell into silence. From the observation window, Kelsey and Mira could only see a man standing in the center of the room, and a black German shepherd sitting before him, as if they had never been apart. Noah knelt. His hands didn't reach out. They simply rested loosely at his sides. Shadow. This time it wasn't a call. It was a whisper, like a quiet reminder to the world he had once been here. And maybe he still was. Echo let out a low whimper. Not from pain. Not a pet's excited cry, but the sound of a soul just released from too many years in confinement. And when their eyes met, no other signal was needed. They recognized each other, not with their eyes, but with something deeper than instinct. Echo remained seated, never breaking eye contact with Noah. He didn't move, but in every muscle, a storm was rising. A chaos not yet voiced, a collision between memory and reality, where the name Shadow had once meant the whole world, and the command Attention had drawn the line between life and death. Noah said nothing else. He remained kneeling, hands relaxed. No summoning, no coaxing. He knew. If this was Shadow, then he didn't need to be convinced, only given a space safe enough for memory to return on its own. Echo blinked, then lowered his head slightly, not bowed but tilted, exactly the way he had been trained when awaiting the next command. Noah didn't speak, just looked, unblinking. Outside, Mira placed her hand against the glass. She didn't know when she had started holding her breath. Kelsey, standing beside her, whispered, "If he remembers, the next second will be the first time his heart hears its own beat again." Echo lifted one front paw, very gently, not like a clumsy puppy, but steady, full of control, as if every step was feeling out emotional terrain. Noah saw it, didn't cheer, didn't cry out. He simply closed his eyes for 1 second, just enough to keep from shattering into pieces. Echo came closer, now only 2 meters away, then stopped. He lifted his head. His eyes were dark, deep like a canyon, but this time there was light rising from within. Noah took a breath, the first time he saw the true look of his old friend. "Shadow," he whispered, no longer a command, just a name carried by 3 years of being erased from files, from dreams, from hope. Echo let out a low cry, a sound pressed from deep inside his chest, and slowly reached his neck forward. His ears trembled, not from fear, but because the memory had just touched the softest place in his mind, the place no one had reached for 3 years. Then he rose fully, his body lengthened, ears perked, chest opened. He was no longer Echo, the creature from Kennel 14. He was Shadow, the soldier who had never left his post. And he looked Noah straight in the eye, as if waiting for just one final signal to return to the world he once belonged to. The space between them was now less than 2 meters, but for Echo, it was the distance of 3 years. 3 years without command, without name. No one to answer that first bark, and no one to hear the growls stifled in dreams. Noah straightened his kneel. He didn't call again. His gaze held no expectation, no pleading. It simply opened, fully, as if all the times he thought he had lost Shadow dissolved into this moment. Echo looked into that man's eyes. No hesitation, no fear, but also no joy, not the kind seen in typical reunions. Because this wasn't a reunion, this was a return to life. Inside Echo, everything ignited like fire-catching wind. No one could see the storm spinning inside him, but it was real. A cry from his chest. Not, "You've come back," but, "Finally, I don't have to wait anymore." Echo stepped forward. This time, he didn't stop, didn't hesitate. Every step was a piece of the road he had stood waiting on for 3 years. And then he ran. Not wildly, not leaping, just a firm, deliberate stride, as if his body had finally been given permission to do what his heart had wanted all along. Noah opened his arms, but before he could brace, Echo was already there. He curled into him, pressed tightly into his chest, head nuzzling into the hollow of his neck, his whole body leaning in as if trying to reclaim the scent of sweat. The scent of the man who had once stood beside him through white sand, gunpowder, and moonless nights. Noah didn't brace. He collapsed forward, and the two crumpled to the floor like something broken, now made whole, and then he cried. No sound, no sobbing, just tears, spilling from the deepest place where he had locked everything away just to keep surviving. Echo whimpered, then pressed even closer. His paw scraped gently along Noah's back, as if to say, "I'm still here. I'm still on watch. I haven't left my post." Kelsey, standing at the window, couldn't hold back. She turned away, covering her mouth, half from emotion, half because she felt she was witnessing something too sacred to watch directly. Mira didn't look away. She didn't cry. But her chest tightened, as if all the days she had sat with Echo in silence, all the moments when he hadn't responded, all the times that had seemed hopeless, had now transformed into a heartbeat pulsing right in front of her. In that room, no one spoke. Only the softest of sounds, Echo's whimpers, mingling with Noah's short, uneven breaths. The sounds of two beings trying to reconnect. Not with language, not with memory, but with something far greater. Survival. Noah raised a hand and gently touched Echo's right ear. He stroked it softly, then rested his forehead against the top of Echo's head. "You're real," he whispered, each word cracking open. "You are real." Echo didn't move. He let him speak, let him tremble, let him shed 3 years in one late afternoon, with sunlight threading through the window, casting a soft glow across their backs like the first peace either had ever known. Mira turned away. She knew. Nothing more needed to be said. Only one truth was unfolding before her, a dog once erased from existence, and a soldier who had once lost himself, now calling each other's names without words. A few minutes later, Noah lifted his head. His face was red, but his eyes shone in a way Mira hadn't seen since they first met. "How did you find him?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Mira didn't answer right away. She looked at Echo, still lying against Noah, his ear flicking gently every time he breathed. "I didn't find him," she answered quietly. "He let me see him, bit by bit." Noah nodded. He didn't ask more, because what he had just experienced didn't need to be explained. It only needed to be believed. And for the first time in a very long time, he could believe again. Echo raised his head and licked Noah's chin. Noah smiled, a tired smile, but a true one. The smile of someone who had walked through darkness and found that the light not only existed but had been waiting in the same place where they last said goodbye. Outside, the wind began to rise. The glass windows vibrated softly, echoes from a world still turning. But in that room, time had stilled at just the right moment, so that two souls could return to each other, no longer pieces of something lost, but a whole, reborn in each other's arms. After Echo lay quietly against Noah, the air in the isolation room shifted. It was no longer a place separating humans from animals, no longer a space for testing responses, but a sanctuary where a soul once left behind had found its reason to exist again. Noah tilted slightly, one hand resting on Echo's back, the other following the rhythm of his breathing. He didn't ask anything, didn't whisper anything more. He just sat there, with Echo, and let himself be touched by the truth. They still had each other. Echo's body trembled slightly, not like before, not with fear. Mira noticed it, the kind of tremor that came during regulation, like a body releasing tension it had held too tightly for far too long. She had seen it before in severe PTSD patients. When the nervous system begins to let go, it doesn't do so quietly. It breaks, like water through a dam. Echo had let go, not just into the arms of his former handler, but into the part of life he'd once lost, now returned intact in a single breath. Outside the window, Marlene had arrived. No one knew when. She said nothing, just stood, hand gripping the hem of her shirt, eyes glazed with tears. She knew, for cases as deeply broken as Echo's, if reconnection was possible, even once, it was a miracle most shelters never got to witness. Mira opened her phone and recorded a short video, just a few seconds. Not to post, not for reports, just to remember the moment a creature once erased by the world became someone's whole world again. In the room, Noah whispered, his voice barely rising from his throat. "You still remember, don't you?" A question, but also a confirmation. Echo whimpered, a single beat, just enough to say, yes. A moment later, Noah looked up at Mira through the glass. There was no request in his gaze, no embarrassment, only a depth of gratitude no words could ever carry. Mira smiled and nodded. "Let them stay a little longer," she whispered to Kelsey. Kelsey nodded, her eyes red. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," she said. The wind whistled through the corridor outside. Its echo felt like it came from years past, from battlefields, from sandstorms, from trucks loaded with the wounded, from nights when no one knew if tomorrow would come. And now, in this quiet, white room, that echo had finally been answered. Echo pressed closer, his paw draped over Noah's leg, a primal gesture, the way a guard dog sleeps next to his partner. Noah leaned in, resting his head against Echo, just like a soldier sleeping beside a comrade in the desert. They lay there, unmoving, each one hearing the heartbeat of the other. No more words needed. 15 minutes later, Noah shifted slightly. Not wanting to startle Echo, he gently began to pull back. Echo opened his eyes, but didn't retreat. He just looked, his head tilting slightly, as if asking, "Is it over?" Noah smiled. "Number just that. We have a whole life ahead of us." Echo stood up, walking beside Noah as he moved toward the door. As Noah reached for the door handle, Echo stopped, then turned his head and looked around the room one last time, as if telling the place that had held his memories, "I won't be coming back." When the door opened and the hallway light spilled in, Noah stood there, Echo by his side, Mira facing them, and in that moment they were no longer handler, dog, therapist. They were survivors who had found each other at the last edge of hope. Mira reached out and touched Echo's neck. For the first time, he didn't pull away, didn't turn his head. He stayed still and gave a small wag of the tail. Not strong, not excited, just a movement of trust beginning to bloom. Echo had returned, not just in body, but to the very person who had once believed he wasn't worthy of being brought back. And Noah, who once thought he had nothing left to hold on to, now stood in the white hallway of a rescue shelter with the first reason to live again. They left the shelter on a late afternoon, under the cold bronze hues of late autumn. Noah's old pickup truck rolled slowly over the gravel road, the window slightly open so Echo could stick his head out, though his eyes never left the front cabin. He remembered that space, even after 3 years, even if every scent might have changed. The map of memory inside Echo had never been erased. Noah said nothing the entire drive. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, shoulders drawn in, not from the cold, but because something too big had just happened, and he didn't yet know where to place it in the mismatched puzzle of his life. When they arrived, Echo didn't leap from the truck like most dogs. He stepped down, exactly like a soldier disembarking from a landing zone. No running, no barking. Just walked straight to the porch steps and stood by the door, like he had done for 2 years before vanishing. Mira followed, keeping a respectful distance. She knew, from now on, every day would be a test, not just for Echo or Noah, but for herself, the one standing between 2 wounds trying to find a way to heal. The first week passed slowly, like early winter fog. Noah remained reserved. He followed therapy protocols exactly, on time, precise, but never told a single story about himself. Whenever Mira asked, he nodded or shook his head, the way soldiers answer orders. He still hadn't spoken Echo's name aloud. But every time he passed by, his gaze paused, just long enough for Mira to know. He was learning how to see a living creature with emotion, not duty. Echo wasn't easy either. He slept in the corner of the house, back against the wall, facing the door. He wouldn't eat with strangers around. He wouldn't come near Mira except during therapy. He acted as if loyalty was something that could only belong to one person, and the rest of the world was a thing that could vanish at any moment. Still, tiny pieces began to shift. On the 3rd morning, While Mira was packing up therapy tools, she dropped a hand roller to the floor. The loud clatter startled Echo. He jumped up and stood between Mira and the window, ears perked, teeth bared in a protective stance. Noah appeared almost instantly. "Echo!" he called, voice low. Echo turned back, eyes still locked on Mira, but his tail had lowered. From that point, Mira began to take note. At night, Echo patrolled the cabin exactly 3 times, always pausing by the west window to watch the forest. When Noah slept, Echo didn't lie next to him, but at a 1-arm distance, close enough to launch forward, far enough not to intrude. Whenever Mira raised her voice during conversation, Echo would lift his head, ears taut, but didn't react if her gaze softened. Noah started keeping the window open during therapy. One day he exposed an arm with a long scar from wrist to elbow. Mira didn't ask. She simply knelt to apply ointment. Echo came forward then, rested his chin on Noah's leg, his eyes facing the door. The gesture lasted exactly 4 seconds. But Mira understood. It was Echo's way of saying, "Someone is still standing guard for you." On the 10th day, Mira offered Echo a rubber toy. He didn't bite it, just glanced at it. But after she turned away, he gently picked it up and placed it on Noah's foot. Mira began implementing a parallel therapy model, unofficial but intentional. She used synchronization exercises. When Noah raised his left arm, Echo was taught to lift his head. When Noah practiced deep breathing, Echo was given a background soundscape, birds, streams, to help sync their heartbeats. She didn't call them exercises, just adjustment moments. And both, man and dog, began to hear each other's rhythm of life returning. One night, a storm rolled in. Mira stopped by the cabin around 7 p.m. to deliver medication. Noah didn't speak, just nodded. She was about to leave when a loud thunderclap boomed from the east, and Echo jumped up. No howling, no panic, just circled to the door and stood still. Noah followed his gaze, then stood too. "He still remembers the forest patrol routine," he said for the first time that evening, his voice quiet. But in his eyes, something had just softened. Mira knew. They weren't healed. Not just because of reflexes. Not because Echo still slept near the door. Not because Noah still couldn't bring himself to touch the photo frame face down in the living room. But because neither of them knew yet whether they were allowed to feel joy again. But what was certain was this: they had begun to live. Echo still kept watch. Noah still stayed silent. Mira still remained patient. And in that small wooden cabin on the edge of the forest, 2 beings who once believed they had lost everything were learning how to exist again. Not as soldiers, not as working dogs, but as souls, learning to call each other by the rhythm of life. One morning, as Mira was guiding Noah through a shoulder and neck regulation exercise on the floor mat, Echo lay nearby, eyes closed, ears relaxed, seemingly asleep. Suddenly, the sound of an ambulance siren echoed through the forest road, rising and then fading. Mira turned her head briefly, but Echo reacted before she could. No growl, no bark, just a leap to stand between Noah and the glass window, his whole body stiff like a coiled spring. Noah froze. His body didn't respond right away. Only when Echo stepped forward half a stride, eyes locked on a void far in the distance, did Noah quickly place his hand on Echo's back. "That's enough," he said softly. "No need to stand guard. This isn't the base." Echo paused. His eyes stayed wide open, but his back slowly eased down, and he sat next to Noah, as if still not entirely convinced by the reassurance. Mira said nothing. She simply took note of the moment with her eyes, then handed Noah a towel to wipe his forehead. "Echo hasn't forgotten," she said quietly. "And neither has your body." Noah nodded. His eyes didn't meet anyone's, but they drifted somewhere far away. That evening, Mira sent a sound file to Noah's phone. No message, no explanation, just a background track of nature, rustling leaves, footsteps pacing evenly, like a forest patrol route. Noah played it after Echo had fallen asleep. The dog lay curled by the window, as always, but that night, when the sound began, Echo didn't get up. He only lifted his head, listened, then rested it down on Noah's foot, for the first time. The next morning, Mira arrived with a hand-drawn sketch, a layout of the cabin. She placed it on the wooden dining table. "I'd like to create a safe zone for Echo. A separate hallway, wide enough, enclosed, not facing the door directly. We can add background sounds, soft materials, give him a place to retreat if everything becomes too much." Noah studied the drawing for a long time. "And me?" he asked. The tone wasn't sarcastic, just an honest question. Mira looked up. "I think you need a way out too." They built that space together over 3 days. Echo watched every step. He didn't interfere, but every time Mira left the cabin, he would circle the area under construction, sniff each corner, then return to his place. On the 3rd day, Noah tried playing music while working on the porch. Echo didn't react. He lay against the wall, eyes open, but no longer in a guard stance. Instead, he glanced at Noah, then rested his head on his front paws, as if saying, "You're still here? That's enough." One afternoon, Mira was writing notes as Noah turned on the TV. It accidentally landed on a news broadcast with footage of war, the sound of an explosion. They didn't turn it off in time. Echo had already sprung to his feet. No howl, no panic. He circled Noah once, then stood facing Mira, eyes wide, mouth closed. Noah approached. He knelt beside Echo and placed a hand on the dog's chest. "It's over now. No more guns. No more blood." His voice trembled, not from fear, but because it was the first time he had admitted that truth to himself. Mira closed her tablet, stopped taking notes. She stepped onto the porch and took a long breath. That day was full of clouds, but for her, it was the brightest day of the entire autumn. Echo changed slowly, not through grand gestures, but through small movements that only someone who had waited long enough would notice. He slept at Noah's feet every weekend, stopped nightly patrols, just one round, then lay still. When Mira left the cabin, he didn't go to the door anymore. Instead, he laid his head on the towel she left on the chair. Each time Noah woke in the night, he didn't jolt upright like before. Because every time he opened his eyes, Echo was lying there, eyes open, watching him. No call was needed, no light, just that presence. And it was enough. And in that cabin, where silence had once been a form of survival, there was now the clink of dishes, the soft tap of Echo's paws across the wooden floor, the murmur of Noah reading therapy instructions aloud, and Mira's quiet laughter every time Echo tried a new toy, only to carry it back to the same corner. None of them were fully healed. But what mattered most was, they no longer carried their wounds alone. The first night Echo slept on the rug beside Noah's bed, everything stayed quiet. He fell asleep earlier than usual. Mira hadn't come that day, only messaged, "Let you two try silence together tonight." Noah smiled. Silence. They had known too much of it. But now the difference was, this silence had someone listening. Near midnight, when moonlight spilled through the window onto the cold wooden floor, Echo stirred. His face twitched slightly. His hind legs jerked in rhythmic pulses, not tremors, but running. His mouth opened, but he didn't bark. Only a muffled growl escaped his throat, like someone trapped in a command never finished. Noah woke. He didn't speak. He simply sat up, watched, then slowly reached out and placed his hand on Echo's back. The moment his hand touched him, Echo flinched. Not out of fear, but as if he thought he was still on duty. Noah whispered, "You're safe now. You're home." The words didn't echo through the room. They seeped into Echo's back, and after a few seconds, he lay down again, head resting against Noah's leg. But his eyes didn't close. They stayed open and looked far, far away. The next morning, Mira arrived early. Noah was feeding Echo. The metal bowl tapping softly against the floor made a strange new sound. "He dreamed last night," Noah said. Mira glanced at Echo, who was eating slowly, chewing each bite as if calculating it. "Running?" Noah nodded. "No howling, but his legs twitched, just like in the desert, after intense missions. He used to dream like that, but only on nights when the orders weren't clear." Mira fell silent. Echo had never been retrained after going missing. No one had guided him to distinguish between danger and memory. He lived with a cache of data no one had yet decoded, and all of it was pouring out in sleep. That evening, Mira brought a small device, an infrared recorder and motion tracker. Noah agreed. Not because he trusted technology, but because he needed to know what was still left inside Echo. The results from the first night stunned them. Echo didn't just twitch, he whimpered in a pattern, exactly 3 times, each 23 minutes apart. Mira replayed the audio, slowed it down. A sharp inhale, a low growl. A word, not fully formed, but sounding very close to go. "Retreat command?" Mira asked. Noah frowned. "Maybe, or self-issued. He once got trapped between 2 groups, rigged explosives himself and ran the other direction. No one gave him orders, just gunfire and short signals." They repeated the recording for 3 more nights. Same results. At 1:42 a.m., Echo whimpered, then turned his head toward the door. At 2:05, his legs jerked, his mouth opened, forming something close to drop. At 2:28, Echo stood up, walked a circle around the room, then sat staring at the white wall. Mira stitched the sequence together. Drop, go. Stillness. She suddenly remembered. In military training terminology, drop is the dive-to-cover command. Go is the charge. Stillness is the pause after the initial blast. Echo wasn't simply haunted. He was replaying a mission, not just a dream. But memory encoded in neuromuscular reflex. On the 6th morning, Mira tried something new. She printed a frame from the night camera, the moment Echo stared at the wall. At the cabin, she placed the photo in front of Noah. "What do you see?" she asked. Noah looked. "Echo's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For orders," he said without hesitation. Mira nodded, then placed a map on the table. "Is this the base area you were stationed 3 years ago?" Noah furrowed his brow, then nodded slowly. "It's a simple equation," she said. "Echo's not dreaming. He's remembering. But without language, the memories leak through muscles and reflex." Noah didn't speak for 10 minutes. He just sat there, looking at the map, then at Echo, sleeping by the stove. "We need to know how much he remembers," Mira said quietly. "And whether those memories relate to the day you lost him." Noah nodded, this time without hesitation. Because if Echo still remembered, then maybe something had been missed in the official report. That night, for the first time, Mira witnessed a scene that left her speechless. Echo was sleeping. Suddenly, he sprang up, whimpered softly, walked to the door, and touched the handle with his nose, then turned back, laid down, and stared directly at Noah. He had survived, but he had never forgotten. And now, the memory wasn't just knocking. It wanted to speak. Mira had no idea what to expect when Noah invited her to the cabin that morning. "There's no therapy session," he said over the phone. "Just something small I want to give you." His voice was still low, but the usual compression was gone. For the first time since she met him, that voice held a sense of waiting. Not urgency, not tension, just the hope of someone expecting to be met. She arrived later than usual, not because she forgot, but because she had paused along the forest road, where the day before, Echo had looked after her for a long time before retreating to the porch. She stood there for a few minutes. Echo wasn't there, but in the air, there was a scent that felt incredibly real. The scent of a place where someone once waited for you to return. When she arrived, Noah was on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. Echo lay next to his chair, eyes half closed, tail curled under his feet. The scene was so peaceful, Mira briefly feared that one step from her could shatter it. But as she approached, Echo opened his eyes, looked at her, then gently rose, walked over, and touched her hand with his nose. Not to check, not to protect, just a greeting, wordless but clear. Noah stood and nodded slightly. "Come in," he said. "There's something that needs to go back to the right hands." The cabin hadn't changed much, except for one small detail Mira noticed immediately. The photo that once lay face down now stood upright on the shelf. A photo of Shadow, or rather Echo, during his time as a soldier, captured with Noah on patrol, both looking towards the camera, not smiling but standing like two halves of a single purpose. Noah opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Dark wood, simply carved. He handed it to Mira without a word. She took it gently, as if it held something fragile. Opened it. Inside was a black leather collar, restored. The leather had been cleaned, the worn spots restitched, the buckle replaced, but at the center was the same metal tag, set into the inner band. Echo, TE167. Mira stared at it for a long time. Her fingers traced the engraved letters, not shiny, but sharply defined, as if someone had carefully etched them, stroke by stroke. She looked up. Noah was watching her, not smiling, just looking, quietly, deeply. "This name used to be a command," he said. "Now, it's a call to come home." Echo had come to their side without them noticing. He sat, eyes on the table, not looking at the box, just at Mira's hands, where the collar rested. Mira knelt down. She held the collar in both hands, lifted it gently. Echo didn't back away. She gave no command, spoke no name, just opened the collar, softly, as if placing a promise, then fastened it around Echo's neck, slow, firm, without excess motion. The buckle clicked with a tiny sound. Echo didn't react, he just stood still, and after a second, lifted his head. Mira placed her hand gently on his neck, over the collar. There was no leash, no tracker tag, no QR code, just one engraved line, and a heartbeat returning to the people he had chosen to accept. That afternoon, all three of them sat out on the porch. Mira, Noah, and Echo, together on a thick blanket, sunlight filtering through the trees, scattering golden patterns across their shoulders. Mira placed her phone on the opposite chair and set a timer. "We need a photo," she said. Noah tilted his head. "For what?" Mira smiled. "To remember that there was a day when everything we thought was impossible became a family." The photo captured that moment, Echo lying between them, eyes closed, ears relaxed, head resting on Noah's thigh, tail brushing Mira's heel. No one looked at the camera. Only the light, falling at that precise moment, seemed to affirm, "I saw this, and it was real." The following week, Noah moved into a new cabin, still in the woods, but closer to town. He didn't give a reason, only said again, he needs more sunlight. The photo was printed in large format, framed in wood and hung in the living room. That wall had once held medals, duty charts, news clippings. Now there was only one photograph, and beneath it, a single line. "Where it ends is where we begin again." The first spring morning after the long, cold year. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, glowing over every line Mira was writing in her mother's old cloth-bound notebook. The pages had yellowed, the corners worn. Some were smudged with old ink stains, where her mother once documented sessions with abandoned animals at Ridge Valley Shelter. Back then, her mother wrote about a stray dog and a reclusive orphan boy. Now, Mira was writing about a dog who used to be a soldier, and a man who once believed he had already died inside. She placed her pen on the final page and inhaled slowly. Outside, the leaves rustled gently. Echo lay by the door, eyes half closed. Noah was fixing part of the fence in the back garden, a task he never thought he'd do again. Mira wrote, "Mom once healed here, and I've continued that, with a dog who had forgotten how to live and a man who didn't want to. But not with knowledge or technique. With time, with gentle repetition. With silence long enough for someone to speak their pain. With their eyes, with their breath. And with a voice echoing from the past that everyone thought was lost." After placing the final period, Mira didn't close the book. She left it open. Next to a newly printed photo, the one Noah had framed just yesterday, Echo lying between them, eyes closed, wearing the Echo TE167 collar, bathed in quiet light, as if the world itself had confirmed. He had found where he belonged. That afternoon, they visited the Community Veterans Center in the nearby town. Unlike Mira's first time there as a volunteer, this time, Noah and Echo came along as newly registered members of the PTSD Animal Assisted Therapy program. The first person they met was an elderly man in a wheelchair named Hank. He had been an artillery gunner, hadn't spoken in 4 months. Echo stepped forward, not too close, sat exactly 1 meter away, and waited. Hank looked at him, didn't bow, didn't smile. But 10 minutes later, he said to Mira, "He can stand guard for me, yeah?" Every week they visited the rehab camp once. Echo wasn't the playful, tail-wagging kind. He didn't perform tricks, but he watched, listened, sat quietly beside them. One young veteran once said, "He's like me. Doesn't want anyone too close, but doesn't want to be left alone either." Mira didn't do anything dramatic. She simply walked alongside them, with her behavior tracker and a new notebook. Noah began opening up in small ways, not about war, but about how Echo reacted to light, to classical music, how he always sat in the one corner that shielded the sleeping person from the afternoon sun. Those little stories made others start telling their own. One afternoon, Mira heard laughter from 3 men who had only known silence and cigarette smoke before. Echo lay in the middle, tail sweeping lightly across the floor. She sat quietly in the doorway, hand resting on her notebook. And for the first time, she thought, her mother must be smiling. By late spring, Ridge Valley Shelter received a grant to expand into a full recovery center for both people and dogs. Mira took on the role of coordinator, on one condition. We need both Echo and Noah. Neither refused. Noah wasn't a speaker, but at the opening ceremony when invited on stage, He said only one sentence. We survived. And now, we want to help others live again. Echo stood beside him. Didn't bark. Didn't lower his head. Just looked up toward the crowd. And someone in the audience began to cry. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Mira, Noah, and Echo sat on the center's front steps, each holding a cup of warm tea. So we begin again, huh? Mira asked. Noah nodded. But not from the start, he said. We begin where we once thought it had ended. Echo rested his head on her knee. She leaned down, fingers grazing the collar on his neck, now darker with age, but the engraving TE167 still visible. She whispered, You're not just a tag anymore. You're a sound, the only sound left that helped us find each other again. That night, seated beside the open window, moonlight falling on a blank page, Mira wrote, No one knows who they'll become after trauma. Some vanish, some hide. But some, like Echo, like Noah, return not to tell old stories, but to help others avoid the place where they once got lost. She paused, added one final line, small and quiet, because sometimes the only echo left from the past is the sound that guides us home. The end, but not a closure. Because from now on, whenever someone stands on the edge between wanting to live and not, they'll have a place to go. And there will be a dog, not barking, not wagging his tail, just standing there, waiting. Have you ever seen a dog sitting still in front of a house that no longer exists? Not for a day, not for a week, but for 3 whole years. No barking, no wandering, no looking for another family. He just lay there, right where the front step used to be, eyes fixed on a road where no one passed anymore, as if he were waiting for something, or more accurately, someone. How could an animal be that persistent? And what could make it trust so deeply that it chose not the easier path of survival, but to remain in the place it once called home? They called him Rocky, a German shepherd once belonging to the Lawson family. But no one truly knew the story behind his eyes. Eyes that weren't wild anymore, nor entirely gentle, but held a strange mixture of loss, loyalty, and a silent, unwavering faith. 3 years ago, a Category 4 hurricane swept through the coastal town where Rocky used to live. In the chaos of evacuation, his family had to leave in a hurry, with no time to take Rocky. He was left behind, not forgotten, but lost to the winds, the collapsing doors, and the ticking clock that waited for no one. They searched for him, but it was hopeless. Everyone believed Rocky didn't survive. Everyone except Rocky. No one expected that weeks later the dog would find his way back to what remained of his old home, now just a patch of broken land, shattered and stripped of anything familiar. And from that day on, Rocky never left. You might call it instinct, absolute loyalty. But if you ever saw the way Rocky rested his head on the spot where the doorstep used to be every sunset, you would understand. It was love. This story isn't simply about a lost dog. It's about a soul that chose to wait, with all the faith it had left. And somehow, that love led to a miracle. 3 years ago, on a small street along Florida's coast, where the sun always seemed to rise a few minutes early and the salty air slipped through every crack and window, the Lawson family lived in a modest 2-story wooden house. Not luxurious, not perfect, but always filled with laughter and the warm breath of a family that knew how to love. Owen Lawson, the father, was a civil engineer, calm by nature, with eyes that always watched in silence, as if carrying the weight of the world. His wife, Marissa, was a nurse at the local clinic, a gentlewoman who always held her son's hand at bedtime, like a ritual never to be forgotten. And at the center of that entire world was Eli, their 10-year-old son, skinny, with messy brown hair, a love for building models, and a strong dislike for boiled carrots. He didn't have many friends, but he did have one, loyal, understanding, and always quietly beside him, a German shepherd named Rocky. Rocky wasn't the first dog Eli had ever met, but he was the only one Eli called family. From the first time Eli held him, just a trembling 8-week-old ball of fluff, Rocky had been his shadow. Every morning, Rocky sat at the bedroom door, waiting precisely as Eli stepped off his bed. Every afternoon, the rattle of Eli's bicycle tires was Rocky's cue to jump up and dash to the gate, tail wagging tirelessly. "I think Rocky understands me even before I speak," Eli once whispered to his mother. And Marissa smiled and nodded. "I believe he understands even the things you never say." That summer began like any other, filled with cicada songs, melting ice cream, and endless evening walks between a boy and his beloved dog. But something else crept in, like an itch on the back that no one notices at first. The first news of a low-pressure system appeared over the Atlantic. People skimmed past it. A few days later, a name started showing up on TV: Hurricane Jasper. "Category 2, they said. "It'll change course." Owen kept going to work as usual. Marissa rotated her shifts at the clinic, but water trucks and sandbags started parking more frequently at the gas station. The grocery store ran out of milk and batteries in a single morning. Children weren't allowed near the beach. Eli didn't fully understand, but Rocky seemed to sense something. One evening, while Eli was tossing a ball as usual, Rocky didn't chase it. He just stood still, ears perked, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sky looked grayer than usual. "Did I throw it wrong?" Eli laughed, but Rocky didn't move. The way Rocky stared at the sky that day, longer, deeper, would only make sense to Eli much later. It was the gaze of a creature who felt disaster before humans did. 2 days later, Jasper became a Category 3 hurricane. People began to evacuate in small numbers. The Lawsons hadn't decided to leave yet. Like many others, they hoped the storm would shift direction. They had lived through hurricanes before: strong winds, fallen trees, a few days without power, but everything would pass. Until the third night, when Jasper jumped to a Category 4 overnight. A shrieking emergency alert shook the phones at 1 a.m. "Evacuate immediately. Landfall expected within 6 hours. Winds may exceed 150 miles per hour." Owen jumped up. Marissa grabbed the suitcase. Eli was still asleep when the hurried voice broke through the darkness. "Wake up! We have to go now!" The whole family scrambled to prepare. Documents, essentials, medicine, dry food. Owen opened the car door under the pounding rain and wind. Rocky barked, not a joyful bark, but a primal howl, as if to say, something's not right. Eli wrapped his arms tightly around Rocky's neck. "Come on, buddy, let's get in the car." But just as the door opened, a violent gust of wind struck, strong enough to rip the umbrella from Marissa's hand. Rocky startled. He jumped back, ears up, and suddenly bolted toward the gate as if something was threatening. "Rocky!" Eli screamed and chased after him. But in the darkness of the storm, the boy's cries were swallowed whole. Owen managed a few steps before the ground slipped beneath him and the wind whipped across like a lash. They couldn't see Rocky anymore. Marissa grabbed Eli's hand and pulled him toward the car. "We have to go. He'll be okay. We'll find him, I promise." But in Eli's eyes, from that moment on, something shattered. The moment you're forced to leave, to survive, even when you know you're leaving a piece of your heart behind. No one knew exactly how far Rocky had run that stormy night. It might have been a few blocks, or miles. But when the first post-storm sun rose, faint and pale, as if afraid to witness the ruined world below, Rocky woke up in a drenched wild forest more than 2 miles from the neighborhood. He was trembling, his fur matted with rain and mud. His ears still rang from the deafening howl of the wind. Around him were fallen trees, twisted sheets of metal, shattered wood, the remains of dreams crushed by the storm. No Eli, no familiar voice calling. Only silence, the strange, heavy kind that follows nature's fury. He stood up, took a few steps, then froze. His rear right leg limped, a small wound from hitting a metal fence the night before. But Rocky didn't whimper, didn't howl, didn't cry for help. Instead, he sniffed the ground, turned his head, ears alert, and began to walk. Rocky didn't know what missing meant, but in his instinctive world, he knew one thing. He had to find his way back. Even if it burned, even if it fell, even if it disappeared, home was something that couldn't vanish from the heart of a loyal dog. He followed fading scents, crossed debris, crawled under torn fences. Sometimes he stopped at familiar turns, looked around, sniffed the earth, then continued on. He paused under a collapsed roof once, shivering in the cold wind, staring into the emptiness as if waiting to hear the familiar call. "Rocky, come home?" But no voice came, only the soft tapping of rain and the hunger creeping into every breath. On the second day after the storm, Rocky reached the boundary of the old neighborhood. But it was no longer the place he once knew. No more white-painted walls, no more scent of soap from the Lawsons' second-story window, no more purple orchids Marissa used to water every morning. Only shattered foundations, weeds sprouting between broken bricks, and a warning sign. "Unsafe area. Do not enter." Rocky stopped in front of Lot 17, the place that used to be his home. He needed no street sign, no one to guide him. His body, his heart remembered every tile, every step, every tree he had once sniffed each afternoon. And right where the front step used to be, amid the desolation and the wind, Rocky sat down. Days passed. The first person to see him was a power grid inspector. He spotted a dark figure sitting motionless in the rubble, thinking it was a carcass. When he got closer, Rocky stood up, backed away a few steps, didn't growl, didn't bark, just silent. And once the man left, Rocky returned to his spot and sat again. Night fell. No lights, no heater, no warm bed. But Rocky didn't leave. He curled into himself, back pressed against a piece of surviving wall, as if folding all the memories he had left into one corner of his body. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he howled softly, not from fear, but as if calling for someone who could no longer answer. The neighborhood remained mostly empty. Many evacuees hadn't returned. But the workers clearing debris, engineers, volunteers, and aid staff began noticing Rocky's presence. Some brought food out of sympathy. He only ate after they walked away. They gave him a name, Ghost of 17. Not because he was frightening, but because he was there, yet seemed invisible. Like a leftover piece of memory among everything that had been swept away. The first month passed, then the second. Every day, Rocky sat in the same place, eyes fixed on the road leading into the neighborhood, the road where the Lawsons' car used to come home each evening. People grew used to him being there, some called rescue centers, but every time someone tried to get close, Rocky would stand up, step back a few paces, and sit again, like a sacred rule he would never break. "I'm still waiting, but not for you." No one understood why. No one knew what he was waiting for. But in those eyes, there was something too human to ignore, too loyal not to hurt. A dog who survived a hurricane found his way back to a place that no longer existed and chose to stay, not because it was safe, but because his heart could not walk away. And so, a quiet little legend began. Right in the middle of the wreckage, where a soul in the shape of a dog silently guarded memory. No one knew exactly when people stopped calling him a lost dog and began calling him Rocky, the old name, as if the place itself still remembered hearing it once. Maybe it was because of the words someone scribbled in marker on a utility pole. Rocky's still waiting? Maybe it came from stories whispered over morning coffee around town. That dog sits in the same spot every day. It's been 3 years. He's never left. The elders called Rocky the spirit of the old neighborhood. Children often stopped their bikes at a distance, watching him for a long time, too afraid to come closer. And those who had lived through Hurricane Jasper, they understood. Some wounds don't bleed, but they never heal. Season after season passed, and Rocky was still there. In spring, wildflowers pushed through the cracks between broken bricks, painting soft color over the ruined foundation. Rocky lay quietly in the grass, as if merging with the earth. Sparrows flew over his head, dropping white feathers on his back. In summer, sunlight filtered through the bent trees. Rocky often lay in the shadow of a half-broken oak, what used to be the Lawsons' backyard. He breathed softly, ears perking up at the sound of any approaching car. But he never ran toward them. He only watched. Then quietly returned to his spot. In autumn, fallen leaves blanketed his back, and the wind rustled through his increasingly coarse fur. Some passers-by paused to take photos and shared them online with captions like, "This dog still sits here, every day, as if waiting for something bigger than himself." In winter, snow covered the abandoned lot in white. Rocky curled up beside the collapsed wall, shivering through freezing nights. A power line worker once left an old blanket for him and returned the next day to find it untouched, as if a silent refusal. "Thank you. But I'm waiting for something else." No one could talk to Rocky. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't charge at anyone. But he wouldn't let anyone come close either. If someone approached, he would stand up, take a few steps back, and sit again, right at the same spot, eyes fixed on the familiar road, the one where the Lawsons' car used to return every evening. There were nights when locals said they heard Rocky whimper, a brief, soft, heart-piercing sound, like a soul gently knocking on a door long since closed. The small coastal town, 3 years after the hurricane, had begun to recover, but not entirely. Some neighborhoods had been rebuilt with modern concrete, new utility poles, tangled cables. A small soccer field now stood where the town's oldest bakery once was. But some corners remained untouched, as if time itself refused to return. One of those places was Lot 17, where the Lawson family's house had stood. And there, as if etched into the land, was the figure of a German shepherd, sitting as still as stone every single day. No one called him a stray anymore. The locals knew his name. Rocky. The old nodded and said, "He's still there." The young whispered, "Every time I pass by, it feels like I'm disturbing someone who's hurting." No one could get close to Rocky, but no one had the heart to make him leave. Harper Lee wasn't born in this town. She was a freelance journalist from far up north, someone who often took on stories others found too small to publish or too sad to read. But Harper believed in untold stories because they were the quiet pieces that helped people believe in kindness again. This time, a friend had sent her a photo snapped through a car window. A dog sitting in tall grass, the ruins of a house behind him. No leash, no humans. She almost scrolled past it like she had many others. But what made Harper stop were the eyes. In the thousands of dog photos she'd seen, never once had she seen eyes like those, eyes holding something deeply human, deeply silent, and deeply stubborn. And so Harper came to the town, not for a headline, not for a contract, but because she felt she had to see that dog. Just once. The day she arrived, the sky was overcast. The wind wasn't strong, but it stirred the dry grass just enough. Her silver pickup truck turned into the old neighborhood, stopping some distance from Lot 17. Harper turned off the engine, didn't turn on the radio, didn't open the door right away. She just sat there, watching. Rocky was there, just like everyone said. He sat on a broken slab of concrete in front of a rusted iron gate nearly collapsed. Beside him stood a fragment of brick wall, worn gray by wind, sun, and time, like a nameless gravestone. Rocky didn't look at Harper, didn't glance at the car, didn't seem wary. He just kept looking down the road ahead, like someone replaying the film of their life, scene by scene, memory by memory, on an endless loop. Harper opened the car door. The metal hinge creaked in the wind. Rocky didn't move. One step, then two. Harper walked slowly, her boots sinking slightly into the soft soil. She carried no camera, no notebook, no microphone. Just a human, walking toward something in pain. When she was about 20 steps away, the dog turned his head. No growl, no bark. Just a gaze. Steady, deep, and absolutely lucid. That look made Harper stop. It wasn't a plea for help, nor was it reproach. It felt like a question. Are you the one I've been waiting for? A question that made her feel unworthy of taking another step. So Harper sat down, not any closer. She kept her distance, placed both hands on her knees and lifted her face to look at Rocky. She didn't speak. She just sat. One human, one dog, on the ground that once held a home. Silence. The wind swept by. A leaf drifted between them. Rocky turned his head away, his eyes returning to the old road. Harper felt as if she had just been forgiven, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She pulled half a sandwich from her pocket, placed it on the ground, a few steps in front of her. Didn't call, didn't coax. Rocky didn't approach. But when she stepped back, he inched forward, cautiously, nose sniffing the air, then gently picked up the sandwich, carried it back to his place, took a bite, ate slowly, eyes still gazing into the distance. Harper didn't know why her throat tightened. It was just a dog eating a sandwich. But the way he did it, it felt like saying goodbye to a memory. An hour later, Harper left. But before getting into her car, she turned to look one last time. Rocky was still there, as if no one had ever come. But she knew. Something had shifted. That night, Harper didn't write a single article. She just stared at the photo on her phone, zoomed in on those eyes, and wrote one sentence in her travel journal. Sometimes, the quiet presence of a living being is the loudest voice for what has been lost. She didn't know it yet, but what she had just done, sitting silently beside pain, was the first act that began to stir a history that had remained still for 3 years. The next day, Harper came back. Earlier this time. No camera, just a small notebook, a pencil, and a flask of hot coffee. Rocky was there. Like yesterday. Like every day for the past 3 years. He didn't move when Harper approached, but when she sat down, same spot, same distance, he tilted his head slightly, casting a quick glance at her. A look with no suspicion, no alarm, just quiet acknowledgement. You came again. Harper didn't say a word. She just sat there, took a sip of coffee, and looked out toward the road ahead. Then she opened her notebook, turned to the first page, and wrote, "Every story has a beginning, but this one began with waiting." After an hour, Harper stood. This time she didn't look back at Rocky. She simply stepped away, quietly, and began doing what she did best, searching for what the world had forgotten. The small town, 3 years after the hurricane, had changed its skin. The local cafe had tablets for ordering. The pharmacy had launched an online store. But one thing hadn't changed: the way the people here told stories when someone was willing to listen. Harper started at the auto shop near the gas station, where an old man sat on the porch every afternoon. His name was Mr. Tom, 72 years old, with hair white as the smoke from the cigarettes he lit daily, and eyes that weren't colorblind, but could tell apart a dog that once limped on its rear left leg. "You mean the dog at lot 17? He looked up from his newspaper. "I first saw him probably the second month after the storm. He limped, and then every afternoon I'd see him sitting there." 3 years, and he never left?" Harper asked. He nodded. "I used to think he was crazy or stuck in some kind of memory loop, but every time I looked into his eyes, I saw something that reminded me of soldiers coming back from war. Not fear, but a sense of not knowing what to believe in anymore." The next story came from old Mrs. Josephine, 81, living alone just a few blocks from lot 17. She was the first to leave a bowl of water for Rocky, and also the first to be turned away. I brought him blankets, food, called out every name I could think of. He didn't react, but once, as I walked past, he let out a low whine, like a sigh. I stopped, placed my hand on my chest. I wasn't sure if I felt sorry for him or if I saw myself in him. "Did you lose someone after the storm?" The old woman didn't answer. She only bowed her head and softly said, "There are pains you don't need to speak for others to understand." Harper stayed silent. No notes, no more questions. She closed her notebook and stepped off the little porch where Mrs. Josephine still sat each afternoon, her trembling hands knitting yarn for no sweater in particular. Harper didn't need more words. It was that silence, choked yet resilient, that helped her understand. Rocky didn't just live in memory. He had lived inside people's hearts as a nameless symbol. The next day, Harper stopped by the local grocery store, where an old bulletin board hung in the corner, covered in notes, IOUs, repair requests, missing posters. In one dusty corner, she saw a yellowed paper. "Shepherd dog, dark fur, limps on rear leg, spotted near Brookside every morning. Doesn't harm anyone. If you know the owner, call 097. She asked the shopkeeper, a round-bellied, booming-voiced man named Donnie. "Oh, Rocky? Yeah, I wrote that. Must have been 2 years ago. No one ever called." "Why did you call him Rocky?" Donnie shrugged. "I just did. Felt like the name fit him." "Did you try to approach him?" "Tried. Brought food, water. First time he didn't come. Second time, he stared at me for a long while, then walked away. After that, I just left water in the same spot every morning. Never saw him eat." But the food was always gone the next day. Back in her car, Harper opened her notebook and drew a pencil map. At the center, Lot 17. Surrounding it, Mrs. Josephine's house, the grocery store, the auto shop, the old library, the bakery. Each location a witness, each witness a piece of memory. Small, scattered, but all orbiting one presence. Rocky. She went to the old library next, where a high school girl named Anna volunteered to sort books. When Harper asked about Rocky, Anna's eyes lit up. "I know him. I often draw him in my sketchbook." Anna pulled out a thick sketch pad from her backpack, its cover plastered with stickers. Page 8, a sketch of Rocky lying on the ground, head resting on his front paws, eyes gazing into the distance. Page 11. Rocky sitting in the rain, soaked fur clinging to his body, blurred raindrops smudging into sorrow. Page 17. Only a pair of eyes, canine, but with a trace of something human. "I've never owned a dog," Anna said, "but I don't know why. Every time I see him, I feel like someone is holding me still." The more Harper gathered, the more she felt this went beyond the tale of a dog waiting for his owner. Rocky wasn't just waiting for someone to return. He had unknowingly become an anchor for people trying not to drift away from life. She stopped by the abandoned church, where volunteer groups sometimes handed out blankets and meals to the homeless. A tall, gaunt man, known as Reggie, had slept near Lot 17 for a few months during the first summer after the storm. "That dog," he grinned, missing his front teeth. "He's got rules of his own. If you step past the drainage ditch, he backs up. If you stand still, he watches. Every morning he walks a loop around the broken oak tree, then sits down. Like he's patrolling the border of a spirit's territory." Harper asked, "Have you ever heard him bark?" Reggie shook his head. "Never. But honestly, I don't think he needs to. His silence is enough to make kids stop running when they pass by. Adults quiet their engines. He makes the whole old neighborhood remember how to be still." One afternoon, Harper sat in a cafe near the library, laptop open, trying to draft the article. But her fingers kept hesitating. Not because she lacked information, but because... How do you write about a dog that doesn't speak, doesn't react, doesn't act dramatically, but somehow touches the heart of an entire town? At that moment, a couple sitting at the next table turned to her. "You're writing about Rocky, right?" the woman asked. Harper nodded. "We once tried to take him in, 3 years ago, right after the storm. We brought a leash, food, warm blankets. But when we got there, saw him sitting like that, not afraid, not happy, but like he was guarding something. My husband said, 'We can't take him. He's not done yet.'" That evening, Harper returned to Lot 17. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the ruined landscape. Rocky was still there, head lowered, not looking at anyone. Harper didn't sit beside him this time. She stood at a distance, took out her phone, and pressed record. She said nothing. There was only the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the sound of silence echoing from the heart of a dog who had waited far too long. A question began to form in her, like ink bleeding into a page soaked with water. If an entire town remembers a dog, then who remembers him? The next day, Harper returned to the city archives, where the light was always dimmer than necessary, and the scent of old paper had seeped into every fiber of the filing cabinets. Janet, the archivist, wasn't surprised to see her. "I knew you'd be back," she smiled, handing Harper a faded list printed on dot matrix paper. "Lost pets reported after Hurricane Jasper, year 2000X. There were over 200 names on the list. Harper sat at a corner desk, carefully scanning each line. Many names repeated: Shadow, Luna, Bella, Duke. Some had been marked recovered. Most had not. On the 6th page, she stopped. Rocky, German Shepherd, male, approximately 3 years old, Lawson family, address 17 Brookside Lane, reported lost August 28th. Notes not found. Owners relocated out of state. Below, written in red pencil, presumed dead, no further contact. Harper didn't gasp. She simply closed her eyes. She wasn't surprised. But something within her sank, like a truth too plain to be shocking, yet heavier than grief. Rocky hadn't wandered off, hadn't been abandoned, hadn't gotten lost. He had once had a family, a name, a voice that called him with love, arms he slept in, And when the storm took everything, he returned to the only place he'd known as home, and sat there for 3 years in wind and dust simply because he didn't know. No one lived there anymore. Harper flipped the report to the back. It listed the person who filed it. Marissa Lawson. Emergency contact, Owen Lawson, number disconnected. The email address was no longer valid. But Harper now had something more valuable: their full names and former address. She went back to her motel, opened her laptop, and searched. A few moments later, an address popped up under Federal Residency Transfer Records. Lawson family, relocated to Denver, Colorado, end of Hurricane Jasper year. Harper sat still, staring at the screen. A name, an address, a man, possibly the father. And if Rocky had once been their dog, then somewhere there was a child who had lost his only friend. She thought of Eli. His name wasn't listed in any records, but Harper's instincts told her. Rocky was not a guard dog, not a service animal, not a purebred trophy. Rocky belonged to a child, a true companion who walked beside him, slept at the foot of his bed, listened quietly to childhood sorrows no one else could hear. Not every dog is special, but some become memory itself, the last breath of a home once full of life. And Rocky was exactly that. Harper reached out and gently touched the edge of her screen. A still from her video of Rocky appeared, sitting alone among tall grass, shattered foundation beneath him, a crumbling wall behind like a crooked picture frame. The light slanted in from the late afternoon, casting his fur in a bronze glow, no longer glossy, but with the stillness of something that had once burned bright and had learned to fade with grace. 3 years, not one bark, never changed his place, only one act repeated. Each day, Rocky stood, walked a few circles around what was once a yard, then returned to the same spot, as if it were a ritual of memory. He wasn't lost. He was holding space, holding on to a slice of time once filled with laughter and the scent of cookies, with the sound of a mother's slippers on the porch and the clatter of a small bicycle returning each evening. Harper rewound a scene from the footage. It had been lightly raining. Rocky hadn't taken shelter under the broken oak, as he usually did. He just sat there, letting the rain soak his back. His eyes didn't blink. She zoomed in. A single raindrop fell from his lashes, unclear whether it was water or a tear. And suddenly she felt. Rocky wasn't waiting for someone to return. He was holding space for something larger than hope, the existence of a love that time could not erase. She imagined Eli, aged 10. The car door slamming shut in the middle of the storm. That moment he turned back, searching for Rocky, and saw nothing but darkness and rushing water. Some part of that boy had surely been left behind that night, on the far side of the storm, with a final bark swallowed by the wind. And Rocky, after all this time, hadn't stayed behind to survive. He stayed to guard the memory for a young heart that hadn't yet learned how to let go. Harper didn't write anything more. She simply tapped her fingers against the table. There were no words that could fully capture what she felt. Some stories, if you don't tell them, will remain forever, as a silent haunting in someone's heart. She reopened the video she had edited and recorded her voice over the opening lines. They say dogs don't understand the concept of time, but if that's true, then why has one dog sat in the same spot for 3 years, as if he knew every day that passed? Rocky isn't waiting for a person. He's holding on to a place once called home by staying still, refusing to leave. And sometimes, maybe staying still is the only way something can find its way back. Harper adjusted the color grading. No filters, no effects, just darkened the light slightly, to let Rocky's gaze stand out on the screen. Not for technical reasons, but because she knew those eyes would be the strongest message. The video was only 2 minutes and 17 seconds long. No music, no special effects, just a dog sitting motionless on a broken foundation, eyes fixed on a road no one returned from. At the end of the video, Harper didn't add a call to action. She simply displayed a short message, white text on black. 3 years, 1 dog, 1 promise left unkept. If you once knew him, maybe he's still waiting for you in the same place. She saved the video, leaned back in her chair, let out a quiet sigh. Nothing was certain, except for one thing. Tomorrow, someone might see those eyes and remember that once they weren't alone. The video went live at 8 a.m. No ads, no trending hashtags, just a simple title, "The Dog Who Never Left." Harper didn't think much of it. She didn't refresh, didn't count the views. She brewed a pot of tea, set her laptop aside, and stepped out onto the porch, where morning sun filtered through after the rain, soft and pale like a late apology. But the world, when touched by something real, never stays silent. 9:07 a.m. A young nurse in the break room after a night shift, head on the table, exhausted. She opened her phone, looking for something, anything, to take her mind off the weight. The video appeared. 38 seconds in, tears streamed down her face for reasons she couldn't name. She posted on her page, "I once made someone wait so long, they stopped waiting. Thank you, dog, for helping me remember." 9:15 a.m. A woman in Oregon watched it while waiting for her delayed flight. She broke down in tears. 9:31 a.m. A retired firefighter in Maine shared the video with the caption, "I've seen loyalty, but never a silence that hurt this much." 9:42 a.m. A single father sat alone in his car after dropping his son off at school. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier. His 7-year-old often asked, "Why isn't Mommy coming back?" He watched the video. At the frame where Rocky sat in the rain, head bowed but unbroken, he reached into the glove box for a tissue and pressed his forehead to the steering wheel. 10:15 a.m. A retired soldier in Vermont, living alone since the war, clicked on the video shared by an old comrade. He didn't cry, but he stood up, opened the back door, and sat down on the porch steps, where his own war dog used to lie every morning. "You understood me better than most people ever did," he said to the air, as if speaking to the whole world. 11:05 a.m. A high school literature teacher in Ohio paused her lesson. She played the video for her class, offering no explanation. When the final line appeared, "If you once knew him, maybe he's still waiting for you in the same place." The room fell completely silent. One student lowered their head onto the desk. Another turned their face away. The teacher said just one sentence. "We're going to write about what you can't seem to let go of." 11:47 a.m. An elderly woman in a nursing home, who no longer remembered her daughter's name, was shown the video by a nurse. She pointed at the screen and said, "I know those eyes. I once waited for my husband to come home from war. He never did. But I waited 14 years. 12:30 p.m. A 9-year-old boy who had been bullied at school saw the video on his mother's timeline. He watched the part where Rocky stepped out of the rain, slowly but with his head held high, again and again. He mimicked the exact posture in the mirror. And for the first time in months, the next morning, he didn't say, "I don't want to go to school." And somewhere among the more than 1 million people who watched the video in less than 24 hours, a woman wrapping donation boxes for an animal shelter, a father rewriting an email he had never sent to his daughter, a person about to walk away from their marriage paused and typed instead, "Can we slow down and talk?" Harper had expected nothing when she uploaded the video. She simply believed, If a dog had the patience to wait for 3 years in silence, then the world deserved to hear about it. And now, it was that very silence that stirred people to tears. Not because of Rocky, but because they, too, had once lost someone just like him. Yet, among the thousands of eyes turning toward Rocky, there was still one gaze that hadn't found him. Eli. Denver. Colorado. A big city. Tall buildings, endless traffic. The Lawson family's life had shifted into a new rhythm. Eli, now 13, was taller, quieter. He still woke up early, but no one chased after him anymore when he rode his bike out of the house. In Eli's room, there was a photo frame turned to face the wall. No one was allowed to touch it. He never said it aloud, but his parents both knew. The picture was of Eli and Rocky, taken that last summer, just before Hurricane Jasper. Eli didn't use social media much. He preferred books, model kits, and pencil sketches, things that were quiet, like him. And that was why the Lawson family had no idea about the video that was making thousands cry over a dog named Rocky. Until that afternoon. Eli was in the school library, looking for materials for a history assignment. His classmate, Emma, was sitting nearby. She slid her chair closer. Eli. What is it? Emma didn't answer right away. She opened her phone and handed it to him. I'm not sure, but is that Rocky? Eli froze. Not because of the name, but because of the image on the screen. A German shepherd sitting on bare cement, surrounded by tall grass, a crumbling brick wall behind him. No leash, no collar, just a pair of eyes looking forward, hollow yet filled with waiting. Eli didn't breathe. He stared at the screen, as if someone had tightened a string around his heart. Wait, go back to the start. Emma nodded. As the reporter's voice began, Rocky isn't waiting for a person. He's holding on to a place once called home. Eli reached out, held the phone, eyes locked onto every slight movement the dog made, every head tilt, every slow blink, the way his ears flicked when the wind stirred. All of it was painfully familiar. Inside Eli, a door opened. The smell of damp earth, the click of claws on wood floors, afternoons curled up against Rocky's back reading books, stormy nights under the blankets, hiding together, as if the world could be made safe again, just by Rocky's breath beside him. He had never really said goodbye. Because that day, Rocky disappeared into the storm. And after that, no one ever found him. The family had to move. Everyone said the dog was gone. Eli didn't argue. But deep down, he always knew Rocky wasn't the kind of dog who would vanish without a word. Eli shoved his chair back. Eli, what's wrong? Emma called. He didn't reply. He ran out of the library, gripping the phone as if afraid someone might erase that video from the world. When he got home, Eli pounded on his parents' bedroom door. Marissa opened it, startled and concerned. What's wrong, sweetheart? He didn't speak. He simply held out the phone. She squinted at the screen, tapped play. By the time the video paused on Rocky's eyes, she dropped her hand to cover her mouth and stepped back. Oh my God! Owen stepped forward, looked over her shoulder. They both went still. Marissa cried first. Not loudly, just something breaking deep within. Eli sat down on the floor. His voice trembled. It's really him, isn't it, Mom? Owen didn't speak, but his eyes were red. He sat beside Eli, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gave it a gentle squeeze. Yes, son. It's Rocky. The words fell like a blade, cutting the last thread holding Eli upright. He collapsed into his father's arms, sobbing, as if every piece of his childhood, long buried, could no longer stay hidden. Marissa knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around Eli, a trembling embrace, not to comfort, but to hold close the memories she had once forced herself to forget. Eli didn't cry out loud. He just sobbed in waves, his small shoulders shaking, as if trying to hold something together. I thought Rocky died. I thought it was my fault." Marissa shook her head, whispering, No, Eli, it wasn't your fault. It was me. I didn't go back." Her voice cracked, breaking like ice over a lake that had held too much for too long. Owen bowed his head. For the first time, the man who had held the family together through storms had no words left. In the living room, where Rocky had never returned, his presence suddenly filled the space. Eli remembered vividly. Rocky was always the first to know when Eli was sick. Even when he'd only sneezed twice, Rocky would lie beside him, head resting on his leg, eyes never leaving his face. Rocky once retrieved Eli's missing shoe from the yard and placed it right next to the other, as if tidiness was sacred in his dog world. Rocky had barked just once when Eli fell off his bike, not to call for help, but to say, "Don't give up. I'm here." Marissa suddenly stood, walked into the storage room. She opened the deepest drawer, the one she'd promised to sort later, and never touched again. Inside, a worn leather collar. Still attached, a faded tag. Rocky, if found, please call the phone number was no longer in service. Next to it, an old photo. Eli hugging Rocky, his cheek smeared with ice cream. Rocky licking his ear. Both looking into the camera with that unguarded joy. The kind of light only childhood knows, untouched by the word loss. Marissa brought the photo out, handed it to Eli. He didn't speak, just took it, and gently brushed his fingers over Rocky's image. He waited. 3 years, Eli whispered. The Lawson home suddenly felt smaller, as if the 3 people inside it no longer had enough space to hold all the things they hadn't done in time. No one said it out loud, but the shame was visible in every movement. Marissa walked around the kitchen, turning the stove on and off, as if she wanted to cook something for Rocky. Then realized it had been 3 years since she last believed he was still alive. Owen opened his phone, scrolling through a long list of old calls, but not once had he tried dialing the local rescue hotline from their former town. Eli opened his closet and pulled out a yellow hoodie, the one Rocky used to gently tug at the sleeve whenever Eli wore it the wrong way. The wind outside whispered through the windows. Night had fallen. The clock struck 9:17. No one made a suggestion. But Owen stood up, headed to the garage, and opened the car trunk. "Let's go," he said. Marissa nodded, her eyes red. "Let me pack some water and food." Eli didn't wait for his parents. He had already put on his coat, holding the photo against his chest. They didn't know what time they'd arrive. Didn't know if Rocky would still be there. Didn't know if he'd remember them, or if he'd become part of the earth by now. But they knew this. They couldn't stay here another night, while he was still out there, sitting in silence, waiting. On the highway, the amber streetlights stretched like cracks in time. Eli leaned his head against the window, eyes fixed on the darkness. Inside him stirred a vague, powerful feeling. He wasn't going back to find Rocky. He was going back to find himself. The part left behind in that storm years ago, with a bark no one had heard. Ahead, the car sped forward in silence, like an unspoken apology. Behind them, a dog still hadn't left his place. 3 years, and now just a few more hours, and a miracle might be within reach. The town at night was no longer a town. It had become a stillness, an absence, an atmosphere without shape, where every sound, every movement felt excessive unless it was for something truly important. Harper sat in a folding chair near the edge of the cold concrete foundation. Around her lay the remains of a house long gone, but right at the center, Rocky lay still, like a shadow that had never left. He wasn't asleep, nor fully awake. He was simply there. There, in the way someone is present when they've been left behind, but never once chose to leave. Far away, in another place, an SUV rushed through winding roads. Inside, no one spoke. But the air was so dense that even breath made a sound. Owen gripped the steering wheel with both hands, head tilted slightly forward, as if leaning just a little more might bring him closer to Rocky. Marissa held tightly to the old leather collar, the one she hadn't had the courage to throw away in 3 years. Eli sat between them, the old photo pressed to his chest like a whispered prayer. The closer they got to the old town, the greater the fear grew inside each of them. Marissa finally spoke. What if he's not there anymore? Owen tightened his grip on the wheel. Didn't answer. Eli leaned forward. I'll still go, even if it's just the place where he once lay. No one said anything more. No one dared blink too long, because the real fear wasn't that Rocky had left, but that he was still there and no longer had the strength to believe. A light appeared at the end of the road. Harper saw it first. She didn't move. Just glanced at Rocky. He lifted his head. Not hurried, not alert, just the kind of lift that came from a soul who had watched thousands of headlights pass, only to fade away again. His ears leaned slightly forward. His eyes, opened wider than usual, still carried that quiet emptiness of someone too scared to believe in hope. The light drew nearer. Rocky sat up. From his neck to his shoulders, his body tensed. His 4 legs were stiff, but there was a faint tremble in his hind legs, as if every part of him was holding back a yearning on the verge of breaking loose. The car came closer. Rocky took 1 step forward, no tail wag, no blinking. Another step, then his body froze. Not from fear, but because he needed to know. Was it real this time? The car door opened. 3 figures stepped out. A tall man, a small, slender woman, and a boy. With a walk Rocky knew by heart, down to every step. Rocky didn't run. He didn't leap, didn't bark, didn't whine. He stood, frozen, eyes wide, but still veiled by a thin mist, as if protecting his heart from one more false hope. Eli stepped toward him. No rush, no calling his name, just 1 step, then a pause, another step, then stillness, until the distance between them was only a breath. Rocky tilted his head. His ears drooped. His eyes began to blink. Not evenly, not confidently. But something was melting behind those eyes. Something old, something aching, something loving, something afraid. Eli knelt down. He didn't speak. No tears. Eli simply placed his hand on the ground and left it there, no invitation, no plea, as if to say, if you're still here, I'm still me. Rocky looked at him, and it was as if all 3 years came back in a single blink. The first day he was held in Eli's arms, his fur still smelling of his mother's milk. The time Eli fell and cried until he couldn't breathe, and Rocky lay beside him for 3 hours, unmoving. Those winter afternoons when Rocky waited at the door, listening for the clatter of bicycle wheels. Each image swept across his gaze like a faded film, until one frame stopped and came into perfect focus. Eli, in that yellow hoodie, eyes bright, and a familiar phrase, "Wherever you go, don't go too far from me, okay?" Rocky took a step. Then another and stopped. Eli bowed his head. And Rocky rested his head on Eli's knee. Not like a dog finding his owner, but like a soul finding its body again. Marissa burst into tears. No sound, just tears flowing like a dried-up river finally breaking free. Owen lowered his head, placed his hand on Rocky's head. "Thank you for waiting." Harper turned away, eyes blurred with tears. But she didn't wipe them. Because right now, nothing needed to be said. No one needed to witness anything. The world only needed to stay still tonight, so that a silent love, held in for 3 years, could finally take its first breath. Rocky exhaled. A long, deep breath, as if releasing every quiet year of pain with it. Then he sat, pressing himself into Eli. His tail flicked, not much, but just enough to forgive the world for 3 years of absence. And like that, after all the days the world turned its back, Rocky was finally facing love again. While Eli held Rocky tightly, trembling and overwhelmed, Harper quietly lifted the camera in her palm, pointing it at the dog curled safely in that old embrace. No zoom, no transitions, just a still frame, filled with the car lights, the shivering of human arms, and the surrender in the eyes that had not softened in 3 long years. No narration needed. That scene said everything. The next morning, as the sun rose, Harper still hadn't slept. She sat in her motel room and opened the memory card. Her fingers trembled as she hit play. For the first time in her career, she felt something she didn't have enough words to describe, but knew she couldn't leave untold. She edited it, gently, adjusted the lighting, just enough to preserve the warm haze of a rebirth in the night. Added a soft piano melody, barely there, just a breath behind the images. And the title? The Wait Was Worth It, Rocky's Homecoming. When the video went live, the community was already waiting. And then, they cried. A single mother wrote, "I told my son not to hold on to hope, but this morning, after watching Rocky and that boy, I held him so tight and said, 'You keep believing, because love knows its way back.'" A veteran from Alaska sent a message. "I lost my canine partner after a raid, never forgave myself, but Rocky made me believe that if we ever meet again, maybe one resting of the head is all we'll need." A young woman recorded her reaction to Harper's clip, eyes swollen, clutching an old pet collar. "Every time Rocky looked down that road, I saw the hallway of my house, where my cat used to wait for me every night." Harper read every comment. But the one that struck her the most was from a man who wrote, "I've never owned a pet, but Rocky reminds me of my father, who sat at the train station for 14 years, hoping my mother would come back. She never did. But when he passed, he was still smiling." Eli didn't know how far the video had reached. He only knew that when they got home, he opened the car door slowly and looked at Rocky. The dog no longer looked lost, but he wasn't rushing either. He sniffed the air outside the yard, ears gently folded, eyes scanning. Eli didn't push him. He just sat down on the porch and waited. After a few minutes, Rocky stepped out of the car, each step cautious, as if remeasuring the world itself. Harper filmed until the very end, when Rocky stepped through the threshold, paused at the doorway, and gently raised his head, as if asking, "Am I allowed to stay again?" Eli smiled, patted his chest. "You don't have to ask. This is still your home." Rocky walked in. After Harper posted the second video, people didn't just feel moved. They acted. A veterinarian in Chicago offered Rocky lifetime medical care for free. A senior dog rescue organization received nearly $8,000 in donations within 12 hours, thanks to the video Harper had linked in her post. a group of elementary students launched a Waiting is Never Wrong Day, writing letters to local shelters, pledging to wait for the right four-legged friend. That night, Harper sat alone in her motel room, replaying Rocky's video once more. The image of him resting his head on Eli's lap, eyes half closed, but his lashes still wet. Harper suddenly remembered a quote she once read. "Dogs don't need to know they're loved. They just need to be in the right place." She typed a new caption and uploaded it with the video. "Thank you for teaching us that waiting doesn't make anyone weak. It only proves that heart never truly turned away." Rocky was now asleep at Eli's feet. Every time Eli left the room, Rocky would lift his head. But the moment Eli returned, just one gentle touch on the shoulder, and Rocky would sigh, then drift off again. 3 years weren't a price Rocky had to pay. They were the time the world needed to relearn how to love someone who never spoke. And now, even though the scars hadn't fully healed, Rocky had been touched by a million invisible hands. Not through hugs, but through understanding, and the eyes that finally turned back to what they once forgot. Back in Denver, Rocky wasn't the same. He didn't run into the yard like in heartwarming movie endings. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, didn't sprawl out in the living room like nothing had happened. Instead, Rocky moved slowly, his paws touching the tiled floor as if walking across frozen water, testing every step. As if this house was a trap, and warmth might collapse at any moment. Marissa had set up a corner of the house, placing his old dog bed, brought in from the garage. She laid down the soft fleece blanket Rocky used to drag into his corner. Eli placed an old rubber ball beside it, worn at the edges but still showing the imprint of Rocky's teeth. Rocky looked at everything, but didn't come closer. He chose to lie near the door, where he could hear the sound of cars outside, feel the cold wind slip in through the cracks, just like the nights he'd curled up beside broken brick walls beneath a lonely tree for 3 years. Eli didn't speak. He just quietly laid a blanket by the door and sat next to Rocky. The first night passed like that. No barking, no sighing. Just 2 figures lying side by side, a boy and a dog, both unsure if they truly belonged to each other again. On the second day, Rocky didn't eat. Owen placed his favorite, steamed chicken, in the old ceramic bowl. Rocky approached, sniffed gently, then turned away. Not because of an unfamiliar smell, but because he was used to eating only when no one watched. To swallowing in silence, in the dark, where he wouldn't have to worry about being forced to leave mid-meal. Marissa played soft music while making breakfast, a classic jazz tune. The saxophone started, and immediately Rocky flinched. He jumped up, backing into the corner, eyes wide. Owen turned the music off instantly. Marissa clenched her hands, biting her lip. "It's just music, Rocky, just music." But to Rocky, any sound louder than breathing was a warning. For 3 years, silence had been his only trustworthy companion. He had survived not by living, but by making no sound. That evening, Eli invited Rocky outside. The moon was up, the sky partially clear. Eli held the leash, but didn't clip it to Rocky's collar. Just kept it in his hand. "Do you want to go into the yard?" Eli asked gently, his voice soft, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance between them. Rocky stood at the threshold, ears perked, eyes scanning the patch of grass. He wasn't afraid of open spaces. He just didn't trust that they would remain safe. He stepped forward. 1 step. Then looked back at Eli. Eli nodded. "I'm right here." So Rocky moved forward again. 3 steps. Then he sat, back turned towards the street, eyes fixed on the gate. He didn't play, didn't run, just sat, like he had sat for 3 years on that barren foundation. Harper, still texting occasionally with Marissa, sent one quiet message. 3 years living like a ghost. It'll take a long time for him to believe he's real again. There were moments when the entire Lawson family looked at Rocky and saw themselves. A family that had once fractured, had once told themselves, "We have to keep going," only to realize they'd merely been surviving around a void they never dared name. Rocky was that void. A figure they thought was lost, now returned, but not in the way happy endings in fairy tales promise. That night, Eli wrote in his journal, "Rocky still hasn't looked at me for more than 5 seconds, but he stayed. And I think, for a dog who waited 3 years, staying for 1 day is already a miracle." For 3 nights straight, Rocky didn't sleep inside the house. Eli often woke in the middle of the night and found him lying right by the door, eyes open, unmoving. But on the 4th night, when Eli jolted awake at 3 a.m., Rocky wasn't by the door. Eli's heart pounded. He turned on the light. And there, in the corner of his room, beside the small study desk, Rocky was curled up, resting his head on the yellow hoodie Eli had folded earlier that day. He was asleep. For the first time since coming home. Eli didn't wake him, didn't call. He just sat down on the floor, rested his head on his arms, and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, no one in that house had to leave the door open, waiting for someone to return. Things didn't change overnight. But sometimes it only takes a moment, a small one, to know that trust is slowly being reborn. For Rocky, that moment came on a quiet Saturday morning. Eli was watering the plants in the yard. The wind was gentle, the sky full of clouds. He turned and looked toward the porch, the spot where Rocky lay every morning. Not sleeping, not playing, just watching. "Rocky," Eli called, not in the soft, tentative way he had before, but with a voice that was clear and certain, filled with the meaning, "I'm calling you, not just your shadow." Rocky lifted his head. His eyes opened wide. Eli didn't step forward. He just stood there. And then, Rocky's tail gave a gentle wag. Not fast, not eager like other dogs, just a slow sway, like a quiet punctuation mark on a blank page. But to Eli, it was the first note of a symphony. That night, Eli didn't say anything to his parents. He only wrote in his journal, "He remembered the sound of my voice calling his name. And maybe he's learning again what it means to be called." A week later, it rained. Not a storm, just a steady, quiet drizzle. The kind that makes people want to curl up in blankets or sit still and listen to time pass. Rocky lay near the door. He didn't go outside, but he also didn't curl up tightly like before. He lifted his head toward the sky, ears tuned to the sound of rain tapping the metal roof, like the footsteps of memories returning. And then he barked, not loud, not long, just once. A single bark. Marissa dropped a spoon in the kitchen. Owen looked toward the door. Eli dropped his book and ran out. Rocky didn't look back, but he had barked. After 3 years, he had finally found a reason to speak. Eli sat beside him. "You remember your voice now, don't you?" He smiled, though his eyes shimmered. Rocky glanced at him, not with hesitation, but with the gaze of someone who knew they had just let a piece of their heart be seen. From that day forward, everything began to shift, slowly, gently. Rocky no longer ate in secret. He still waited. But when Marissa set down his bowl, he walked over, not out of hunger, but because he was beginning to believe he could exist in this world without hiding. Owen often sat on the porch reading the morning paper. Rocky began lying near him, not right beside, but close enough to smell the familiar scent of his shirt. And whenever Owen tapped his fingers on his ceramic mug, Rocky would blink as if that rhythm had become their shared hello, a quiet language between two beings who didn't need many words. Marissa placed an old sweater of Eli's in Rocky's corner. One night, when she woke suddenly remembering she'd left the stove on, she saw Rocky was no longer sleeping by the door. He was curled up on the sweater, eyes closed, breathing steady. Not the sleep of alertness, but the sleep of dreamers, of those who believe someone will still call their name when the sun rises. That Sunday, the Lawson family gathered to look at old photos. Eli brought out the albums from when Rocky first came home. He spread them on the table. Photos of Rocky with a slipper in his mouth. Photos of Eli napping against Rocky. Photos of the whole family picnicking while Rocky peeked around for cookies. All three of them laughed. Not a laugh of joy, but one of grace, forgiving the people they once were. And for Rocky, in his long silence. Rocky slowly walked into the living room. He looked at the three of them. At the couch, once forbidden to him. At the large framed photo, 3 people, 1 dog, and a piece of sky that no longer existed. And then, no one called. No one gestured. Rocky stepped forward and climbed onto the couch. He didn't lie on the cushions. He just sat, between them, tail hanging over the edge, eyes fixed on the photo. Eli wrapped his arms around his neck. Owen placed a hand on his back. Marissa leaned into Owen, resting her head on his shoulder, one hand gently touching Rocky's spine. No one said, "Welcome back." They didn't need to, because Rocky had chosen to come back, not as someone called home, but as someone who decided to stay. Harper reread the last message from Marissa. Tonight, Rocky sat between us. No one taught him to do that. He chose to. Harper smiled, and in her heart echoed a line she never wrote down. Some cracks can only be healed by time, but some hearts only need a hand that doesn't pull away. Rocky didn't change overnight. No one expected him to, but none of them realized how heavy his silence had been. As if every breath he took had to be approved by memory. As if, just to touch a hand, he had to cross through 3 years of dust and doubt. Every meal was a test. At first, Rocky kept his old habit, only eating when no one was watching. Marissa would place the bowl down and retreat to the kitchen. Only when footsteps disappeared would Rocky approach, hesitantly, head low, ears back. Even the faintest clatter of dishes could send him retreating to a corner. Owen suggested moving the bowl near the door, where Rocky had spent those 3 years. But Marissa disagreed. If he wants to live again, he has to learn to eat as part of the family. She didn't force him. She simply sat farther away each day. And every time Rocky ate, she would lower her newspaper, glance from the corner of her eye, then look away, as if giving him space to choose trust freely. A week later, in the early morning when the house was still quiet, Marissa discovered the food bowl was completely clean. No drag marks, no crumbs left on the floor, just the quiet of an action no longer bound by fear. That night, Eli tried gently placing his hand on Rocky's back as he lay by the door. Before, Rocky would flinch, pull away, even growl softly. Not out of aggressions, but instinctive defense, survival reflex. But that night, when Eli's hand touched the thick fur, Rocky didn't move away. Not immediately, not completely relaxed. But his eyes no longer widened in alarm. Eli kept his hand there. For seconds. Then minutes. No stroking. Just presence, a way of saying, "I'm here, no pressure, no leaving." Rocky's breathing stayed steady, and for the first time, Eli heard a soft sigh. Not of exhaustion, but of release. One day when Eli got home from school, Marissa had just stepped out from the kitchen when she froze. in front of Eli's bedroom door, Rocky wasn't lying there. Not on the doorstep, not outside. Marissa grew worried. She searched the house, checked the backyard, called his name. No sound. Until she stepped into Eli's room and saw Rocky curled up on the old bed Eli had set up again the week before. No one told him to go there. No one called. No commands. Rocky had chosen to walk in, to place himself where he once belonged. Not because it was a bed, but because, deep inside, the feeling of staying had become stronger than the instinct to hide. Eli walked in after his mom. He didn't do anything, just quietly sat down by the bed. Rocky looked at him for a few seconds. Then, laid his head on the small pillow and closed his eyes. That night, Eli wrote in his journal, "No one led him to the bed. No one made him stay. But he chose to be there. And I think, in a world that once made him wait outside the door, being allowed to choose where to lie down means more than any gift ever could." He no longer looked toward the door whenever there were noises outside, no longer shrank away when Eli reached out. He began to relax, not in the carefree way of most dogs, but like someone who had stood in storms and now dared to sit without clutching his coat. And those first steps, eating meals on time, not avoiding hands, lying on his old bed, they weren't things made to go viral, not loud like trending clips, but to the Lawson family, they were the quiet milestones of a true homecoming. There are nights so peaceful you forget that peace was ever a privilege. That night, the Denver sky was clear as glass, a full moon, a crisp chill. The Lawson family had just finished dinner. Eli sat reading, Rocky at his feet, head resting on the small cushion beside the couch. Everything felt unbreakable, until the first firework exploded. A loud boom tore through the sky, echoing with a deep, resonant rumble. Rocky shot up like an arrow, ears rigid, eyes wide, not understanding, not controlling, only knowing. That sound once meant loss. He turned and bolted for the front door before anyone could stop him. "Rocky," Eli called, but not with a scream. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and ran after him. Owen and Marissa rushed to the porch, only to see two shadows, one running, one following, disappearing into the dark. "Don't let him get lost again," Marissa whispered, like a prayer caught in a choking throat. Rocky dashed across the lawn, through the open gate, past the streetlight, fleeing a nightmare with no shape, no direction, no destination. Only one thing was clear: get away from that sound, the echo of the storm, the night of abandonment. 3 years of silence and hopeless waiting. Eli chased after him, but didn't shout. He knew Rocky didn't need orders. He needed an anchor. "Rocky!" This time his voice was calm, as if calling back a memory, not just a dog. Rocky halted. His paws touched cold concrete. His eyes scanned, saw nothing but dim lights and the noise swelling behind. His back arched, trembling, ears flattened. Eli stopped, didn't approach. He sat on the ground, panting, eyes never leaving Rocky. "No one's going to grab you," he said. "No one's leaving again. But you have to choose." Rocky turned his head. Not all the way, just a glance. His eyes no longer panicked. They were weighing. Considering. Another firework burst. Rocky flinched. His legs took half a step back. But then, he saw Eli, still sitting, still waiting. That moment stretched like time itself had stopped. No more fireworks, no more footsteps. Only 2 pairs of eyes, one calling home, the other deciding. Rocky inhaled. A long, deep breath, then stepped forward. Another step. Then he ran, not leaping like dramatic reunions, just running, enough for trust to catch up with the heart. He pressed into Eli's arms, letting out a soft whimper, not an apology, but a confession. "I'm still learning how to stay." Eli held him tight. "You're doing so well." His voice shook from the cold and from something deeper than the wind of early fall. The two of them sat there, in the yard, fireworks fading in the sky. Eli said nothing more. Rocky laid down, head resting on Eli's leg, for the first time, not from exhaustion, but because he believed this place was right. And in that softening night, the greatest test had passed, not through control, but through choice. Rocky had come back, and this time he didn't need anyone to hold him back, because he chose not to leave. After that night of fireworks, Rocky was no longer the same dog. The act of turning around in the darkness had opened a door, not to the world outside, but within his own heart. A door that had been sealed shut for 3 years because of fear, loss, and trust shattered too many times, now began to open again, not out of instinct, but from a will to survive with meaning. Eli noticed the change the very next morning. He called, "Rocky," not to test anything, just out of habit. But this time Rocky didn't just look. He wagged his tail, strong, certain, without hesitation, like a dry blade of grass catching the wind again from the bottom of a ravine, and for the first time, letting itself rustle. He dashed into the yard, without waiting for a leash. He ran around Eli, unafraid, not glancing at the gate. There was no more secretive glancing toward the road. He looked at Eli, as if Eli was the only destination that mattered. It wasn't the world that had changed. It was Rocky. One day, Eli left the house for just a few minutes, forgetting his art homework. When he came back, he heard a soft scratching at the door. Rocky stood there, not barking, just standing, eyes fixed on the spot where Eli had just vanished, as if he was reminding himself, "I don't have to sit in the same place forever, waiting for someone to return. But if someone belongs to me, I'll be the one who meets them first." That afternoon, Eli tried an old game. He ran ahead, then stopped and turned back. At first, Rocky stayed put, but then he lowered his head, crouched slightly, tail wagging faster and faster, and then he sprinted, ran, not because he was called, but because he wanted to be called. He barked, growled playfully. Eli laughed out loud in the middle of the yard. Rocky chased after, no hesitation, no stopping midway to glance at the street. Just a straight line, toward joy. Marissa stood in the kitchen, silently watching. She placed a hand over her heart. It tightened. But this time, not from fear, but from witnessing her son being loved again by a soul who had once lost everything. That evening, during dinner, Rocky didn't lie under the table anymore. He walked up on his own, laid beside Owen's feet, head resting on his shoe, eyes half closed, as if everyone's presence wasn't a threat anymore, but something essential. Night. The family sat down to watch a movie. Eli sprawled on the sofa. Marissa leaned against Owen. Soft yellow light filled the room. Rocky didn't stay out in the hallway, didn't lie by the door. He walked into the center, gently, slowly, and then sat down. No one called him. Eli looked up, patted his thigh. Rocky lifted a paw, climbed all the way up. Curled up, head resting on Eli's lap. No more movement, no fear of the movie sounds, no attention to the laughter. He was inside, no longer on the edges. And in that moment, without declarations, without ceremony, Rocky officially became part of the family, not because he was pitied, but because he was chosen. The next morning, Eli opened the photo drawer. He pulled out an old picture. Rocky sitting in that barren lot, fur tangled by the wind. He looked at the photo, then turned and looked at Rocky, now fast asleep, legs tucked in, nose resting on a cushion, eyelids twitching as if dreaming of something gentle. He placed the old photo in the lower drawer, then picked up the camera, snapped a new one. Rocky lying in the heart of the family, head resting on Eli's leg, eyes closed, tail loose. No more waiting. No more distance. Just peace, a belonging that no longer needed to be measured by time. Later, Harper would say, her final video about Rocky had no narration, just images. Images that lingered. That very first tail wag, the sideways glance when Eli laughed, the playful leap after a drifting autumn leaf, the eyes no longer staring out the gate, but toward the person calling him. And finally, a photo of Rocky sleeping, surrounded by 3 people, the center of a world that had relearned how to love. No one called him the abandoned dog anymore. No one spoke of 3 years of waiting like it was a tragedy. Because now Rocky was no longer a ghost. He was a living heart, loved and loving in return. And that heart began to play. One late autumn afternoon, while Marissa was preparing dinner, Eli doing homework in his room, and Owen outside at the car looking for his tool bag, Rocky disappeared. No footsteps, no shadow. It wasn't until Marissa stepped out back to hang up a towel that she saw one of Owen's old leather slippers abandoned on the lawn. The other was gone. "Rocky!" she called. Not angry, just curious. No response. But then, from behind a stack of firewood, a head peeked out, ears down, eyes wide, and the slipper dangling from his mouth. She burst into laughter, couldn't help it. "You little rascal," she murmured, still holding the towel, pressing her lips to stop from laughing louder. Rocky stepped out, not running, not pretending innocence. He raised his head, tail wagging furiously as if showing off a great victory. Eli, hearing his mom, ran outside. He saw Rocky in the yard, still biting one end of the slipper, watching Eli for a reaction. "That's not even my slipper," Eli laughed. "It's Dad's." Owen rounded the corner from the front of the house and saw the scene. He crossed his arms, raised a brow. "Is this betrayal, Rocky?" Rocky dropped the slipper, bowed his head, but his tail kept wagging. His eyes sparkled. No guilt, just joy. Joy that someone noticed him through a harmless prank. Owen stepped forward, picked up the slipper, dusted it off. He looked at Rocky, the same way he once had, heavy with guilt. But now his eyes were soft. "Next time pick a cheaper pair, will ya?" Rocky gave a small huff, like a laugh. Eli laughed out loud. Marissa had to turn away to hide her giggles. And in that moment, every crack in the Lawson family seemed to mend, sealed by a silly prank and a wildly wagging tail. Rocky flopped down onto the grass after completing his mission, tongue lolling, panting hard. Eli sat beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You're still the biggest troublemaker in the house." Rocky lifted his head, licked Eli's hand. No one had to teach him how to play anymore. Now he knew that joy didn't have to be hidden, and love never needed to be feared again. Marissa stood on the porch, watching them play in the fading golden light. She turned to Owen, who was still holding the chewed-up slipper. "Did we ever imagine," she asked, "that the day he came back, there would come a time he'd be licking slippers and running laps around the yard like this?" Owen shook his head. "I didn't even dare to think he'd live this long." Marissa took her husband's hand. "And now, he's not just alive. He's joyful, Her voice softened, but her eyes drifted slightly, gentle, yet certain. A memory returned. The small wooden tray in the corner of the office closet. The one no one had opened for 3 years. Not because they forgot, but because they were afraid to remember. The next morning, Marissa opened that cabinet. Her hand touched the dust-covered cloth. She lifted a small wooden box. Inside was Rocky's old collar. The leather had faded, the buckle slightly rusted, and the metal tag engraved with Rocky was scratched from countless adventures. Even the bite marks were still there, playful little dents from when he was a pup, like quiet whispers. "I once lived here. I once belonged here." Eli was sitting on the porch, reading. Rocky lay beside him, eyes half closed in sleep. Marissa stepped out, the collar in her hand. Both Eli and Rocky looked up. She said nothing, just walked forward, sat down in front of Rocky, holding the collar so he could see it. Rocky sniffed gently, once, then again. His eyelids twitched, as if memories flickered past in the scent of old leather, cold metal, and the hand that once stroked his head. Eli tightened his grip on the book. "Do you remember this?" he asked. Rocky looked up, met Eli's eyes. It wasn't a look of anticipation, not seeking permission. No need to hide anymore. He simply gave a soft nod. Marissa reached out, touched the collar, and unbuckled it. "Would you like to wear it again?" she whispered, not waiting for approval, but also not imposing. Rocky didn't back away. He lowered his head slightly, neck tilting, ears relaxed. That gesture, it wasn't obedience. It was complete trust. Marissa fastened the collar. It clicked with a small snap. Everything fell quiet. Only the faint sound of metal against metal remained, like a vow being renewed. A vow that from this moment on he would no longer be nameless. He was Rocky, a son of the Lawson family. Owen stepped onto the porch just then. He saw Rocky lift his head, the morning sun catching the tag around his neck. He smiled, nodded. "Wearing your name again, huh?" He walked over and gently patted Rocky's head. Rocky wagged his tail. Not excitedly, just enough to answer. "And this time, I'll keep it." That night, Eli lay in bed, Rocky curled beneath. He softly ran his fingers along the cool metal tag. That sensation wasn't just touching an object, it was the return of a forgotten identity. Eli closed his eyes and whispered, "This time, if anyone asks your name, I'll never be late to answer." Rocky took a deep breath, exhaled evenly, and fell asleep, not pressed against the wall, not facing the door. In that house, something small had been restored, not just the name on a collar, but a dog who now knew he was seen and called by name by people who had truly come back. Rocky was no longer just a name engraved on a weathered tag, no longer a word cried out in vain at the shelter gate or shouted into the empty wind over the barren fields. It had become a name shaped by emotion, a name that carried acceptance, an unspoken apology, and a renewed promise. No one would be left behind again. The new family photo was hung on a quiet Sunday afternoon. No ceremony, no speeches, no candles, no tears. Just Owen, standing on a small stool, tapping in a new nail, and Marissa, holding the wooden frame, lifting it with a quiet gaze. In the photo, Eli is smiling. Owen bows his head slightly, a hand resting on Rocky's back. And Rocky, lying between them, his head resting on Eli's lap, eyes closed, expression completely at ease, as if nothing in the world mattered more than being right here. The golden afternoon light spilled across the glass, softening every detail like an oil painting. Marissa stepped back, looked at the photo, then down at Rocky, lying still on the floor beside Eli. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked. Eli didn't answer right away. He turned to Rocky, stroked the thick fur behind his neck, then looked back at the photo once more. "It's beautiful," he said, "because it's not just a picture. It's proof." Marissa smiled. Proof of what? That he wasn't forgotten. That night, Eli lay in his room, his desk lamp casting a soft glow. Rocky curled at the foot of the bed. He looked at the blank section of wall where the old picture of Rocky used to hang, back when it was a symbol of loss. Now that wall was empty, and that was perfectly okay. Because inside his chest, nothing was empty anymore. One day, Eli might grow up and leave this home. Rocky might grow old, slow down, sleep more, bark less. Life would go on. Photos would fade, voices would change. But the things that have been restored, the things once broken and somehow made whole again, can never be erased. In every step Rocky takes down the hallway, in every tilt of his head when Eli calls his name, in every sigh as he curls up within the heart of his family, there is a gentle whisper sent out to the world. I came back, and I get to stay. No longer the forgotten dog lying on a cracked foundation, no longer the clouded eyes staring endlessly down an empty road. Rocky now is the embodiment of something simple yet profound, that there are souls who only need someone to say their name, and they will give their entire heart in return. A second copy of the new family photo was printed. Eli carried it in his backpack, not to show off, but always kept in the outermost pocket. He once said, "So that if anyone asks, I'll tell them about the dog who waited for 3 years and was loved for 30 more. Somewhere else in the world, maybe someone is walking past a shelter." A child pauses in front of Kennel 12, where a black-furred dog sits silently in the corner, not wagging its tail, not raising its head. And if that child bends down and says a name, any name, in a voice soft and kind, then perhaps the dog will lift its head. Just a little, but enough for the world to know. That creature is still alive and still waiting. Harper Lee once wrote, "I've met many beings in my life. Some knew how to smile, some knew how to bark, but only a few knew how to wait. And they waited loyally, wordlessly, without condition, as if waiting itself was already love. We live in a world that forgets easily, where noise drowns out the sound of breathing, where every day's headlines carry new losses and then scroll past as if no one was ever left behind. But there are creatures like Rocky who live quietly in those in-between spaces. Not to be pitied, not for fame, but to hold on to one truth: that love, even when forgotten, can still be revived if we are willing to pause, look closer, and say the right name. And if one day you walk past a vacant yard or hear a soft whimper by a threshold, don't turn away too quickly. Because maybe that's not just a dog. Maybe it's your chance to rescue a soul and reclaim the gentle part of your own heart. Because this world doesn't lack loyal beings. It only lacks the hearts patient enough to turn back, to sit down and say, dash. I see you now. I'm not leaving anymore. Rocky doesn't need another video. Doesn't need to be called a legend. He just needs a home, a name spoken with kindness, and a place to lie down, knowing he no longer has to wait.